Hello and welcome to Front End Horse Live. It is a wonderful Tuesday. I hope you are doing great out there. Got a packed chat already. So great to see so many people. And I'm here with Josh Comeau. How you doing, Josh? Great to see you.
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm great. We just met face to face just a few minutes ago. I'm thrilled. We've been kind of chatting back and forth every now and then. You were very early supporter or just like cheerleader of Front End Horse, and I can't thank you enough for that. And I'm so thrilled that we get to have you on after you launch this phenomenal, like gold standard level course that you just launched. How long ago? Just a couple? Has it been?
End
What's
of
time?
September, so about a month.
Okay,
5 or 6 weeks now.
it's no longer September. Okay, that's fine. I don't know, but no, I'm absolutely thrilled to get you on. And yeah, just get to meet you. You're a delightful person. Everything I've seen you on has just been fun to watch. You're just a lot of fun, and yeah, I'm so excited to peel back kind of behind the scenes and learn about your course, because it's one of those things where I'm like, wow, this is really polished, and I'm wondering how he's doing all these tricks and all these little things to it, because it's like the course material is so strong, so dare I say good, but also the platform itself just stands on its own, and you could put like anything on there, and I hope you continue to. And I'm just excited to get into it. But we have fantastic people in chat. How's everybody doing? It's April 2020, I think. Yeah, probably. Yeah, chat. Great to see you. So Josh, if anyone doesn't know who you are, which chat, no shame, no judgment. How might you introduce yourself to someone who might be coming to you for the first time?
Yeah, so I'm a software developer. I've been doing it now for a number of years. I've worked at organizations like Khan Academy, DigitalOcean, Gatsby.js. I left that job at Gatsby.js a little over a year and a half ago now, to start my own course business. And that's what I've been hacking on nights and weekends and days and really all the time since then.
Just kind of like circle the calendar at this point. Just like it's I've worked on it here. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that the thing that I enjoy the most when it comes to software development or web development is polish. And that takes like a number of shapes, right? It's like little animations, little details, little surprises. I feel like so much of the web has become very repetitive. And, like no shame on that. That's like for a lot of businesses, that's totally reasonable. But for my own personal stuff, I always want to make sure that I'm doing something that doesn't look like everything else out there. And that's really where I have a lot of fun, is when I have some quirky idea for a thing that I don't think I've seen anywhere, that I don't really know how to do, and see if I can implement it.
Yeah, I think that's where you really started to blow up, for lack of a more nuanced term, in terms of like I think I knew about you probably just through Gatsby, or like you were on the Gatsby team, and I've been using Gatsby for a while, so I think I kind of found you through that. But then when I started to find people who didn't know Gatsby but would like recommend your blog post somewhere, like, oh, like Josh is getting just shared around a lot. I think it was around those posts for stuff like your Sparkle text and those like delightful interaction blog posts, and just your blog in general. I think the chat would agree that your blog is just a very well structured, well put together, beautiful website that people really enjoy going on. Like things like the little
Yeah, my
very
little like
fun.
button.
I'm lucky I found one that I hadn't already done that to, because there's probably not many left. But yeah, like that
A
interaction.
little, there's
Yeah.
a little Easter egg, which is you can right click to unlike it, so you can go back and forth.
Oh, chat. Did anyone know this? It reverses the pitch too. Oh, Tinkersynth. Yes, I definitely remember you working on that. And also, I think I remember following you back when you were working on the Beat Saber creator thing, right?
Yeah,
That
yeah. I
was
made a
like,
Beat Saber level editor called
yeah,
Beatmapper.
that feels like the before times now in a few ways, right?
Yeah, yeah. That was probably 2019-ish. Yeah. So it's
Yeah.
been a different era now.
People are right-clicking everything on the site now. They're trying to find all the Easter eggs. Oh, it's so good. Yeah. So from your blog, just being a big fan of your stuff, and then you going on to announce and then launch this excellent course, and I'm going to drop this link in the chat if people aren't aware of it. Yeah, you launched this course, and this is a really great sales page with a lot of great touches. But then I think the kind of the insides of it are even more impressive, and by that I mean just the platform and the way that you've structured it to include text and demos and quizzes and videos, and like it's not just like this is a video course or this is a book. It's like going back to the multimedia thing from like middle school. Remember when we had like oh it's multimedia. I'm bringing that phrase back because that's what you've got in this course. But yeah, so I could probably just keep talking about all of your stuff, but did you want to touch on anything before we kind of get into what you wanted to show us?
Yeah, I mean, first let me just say that I really appreciate all the kind words, and I'm thrhrilled to be here, by the way. I've been
Awesome.
a big, as you mentioned, I've been a front-end horse fan since the very early days, and so it's definitely, it's cool to be here. Yeah, I mean, I think that's, I think you've covered a good amount of summary. I should one thing that just for a little bit of backstory.
Yeah.
I started working on this in summer 2020. I did an early access launch in March. So in March, the course was about half done. And essentially I said, for this lower price, you can get current, immediate access to the half that exists, and you can kind of follow along. I'll release new modules as they become completed. That took, of course, a little bit longer than I was expecting, as things do. So yeah, I think that's the full chronology of how this has come to be. Is I did the early access launch in March, and then the full launch towards the end of September.
Nice. I got the early access, I think, and I didn't check. I remember seeing you tweet that there's like a badge, right, for the early access. Nice. So I've got a badge somewhere. I think I can NFT that and sell that to the chat. So chat, let me know. I will sell my badge. Happy to do it. But yeah, so yeah, just a ton of hard work chat went into this. Just highly recommended course, and I'm not the only one saying that. But yeah, I think it's good. I think it's worth your money if you can go for it. Steph, good to see you, and everybody else. There's so many people here, and I definitely want to get rolling. But I just want to say I'm scrolling through chat. I see you. Thank you for being here. A couple of Bens. We got an Alan. I'm just gonna do it. Anton's here. Good to see you. Life's here. Thorium. Nice to see you. Jasper. Amit, good to see you. Ben again, Anthony, Steph, just some fantastic people. Thank you for being here. And before we dig into this, still am terrible at pushing this feature, but we have a feature called I Wonder. So if you type !wonder or !I wonder in chat, and then you ask a question. So I'm going to do I wonder how Josh saves. Oh, Anthony's ahead of me already. So we typed !wonder if this works. I'm going to switch off because it's not a good app and I need to reload it. But it'll capture it there. So Josh, that's basically the way that we're going to save anything that the chat asks. And I will read it to you at the end. So that way chat can ask a question and we don't have to stop what we're doing and shift gears. But also chat knows that they can ask something that's not going to get lost to the sands of time.
Cool.
It'll be saved there. It's not the fanciest thing, but it at least allows us to keep questions, put them to the side, and I don't have to worry about my goldfish memory just losing it. So cool.
Yeah, that's great.
Cool. So did you want to share your screen and kind of start to walk us through maybe talk about what the stack is and why you made those decisions?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Maybe let me know if I have to do anything to share my screen. It should already be.
Nope.
There we are. Good.
Yeah. Just that was my way of saying, hey, I'm about to share your screen.
Coming up now.
Don't have your credit card information up. Yeah. Cool.
Right.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I think maybe if it's okay with you, I'd like to start just by kind of doing a little demo of what the course is, and then we can talk about the stack.
Yep.
Yeah. So the course is called CSS for JavaScript Developers. I wanted to make this course because CSS is one of those things, right? I started writing CSS probably in 2007, 2008. And for like almost a decade, I wrote it without really understanding it, right? Like I knew enough to get by, I could build most things, but I would run into these situations where CSS was just doing something strange, right? Like the same snippet that I've used 15 times before that worked 15 times previously is now not working. And it gives you the impression that CSS is really kind of unpredictable and rickety and inconsistent, when that's not actually true. In my experience, now that I've gotten a little bit deeper into the language, what's much more common is that there's these like fundamental mechanisms that you don't see, you don't know about, but that have these, they're pulling levers behind the curtain.
Got it.
Things like containing blocks and stacking contexts and hypothetical sizes in Flexbox. There's all these ideas that are very clearly explained in the specification, but don't really come up in your day-to-day life. There is a lot of weird noises happening outside, but I guess I don't have to worry about it.
CSS haters outside your window, Josh. Ignore them. CSS haters, they're gonna keep doing it.
That's always the way it goes. Is
you gotta
the
shut them
construction
out.
starts the moment you have a live stream. Yeah.
Yeah. All good.
Yeah. So the goal with the course is really to focus on like having a more complete mental model of what CSS is actually doing, and it's structured into modules. So and I kind of regret naming them the way that I did or structuring them the way that I did, because what I realized is that CSS has all these different layout algorithms, right? You have flow layout and flexbox and grid and positioned layout. And they're all kind of their own mini languages within CSS. So module 0 is kind of the flow layout module. And it's not like one-to-one, or actually, sorry, module 0 is the fundamentals recap. So it's just, if you're relatively new to CSS, the goal here is to get you comfortable with the basic syntax, right? How to set properties, what media queries do, what different selectors are, how to use color and units and typography. This is kind of the making sure everyone has the same kind of solid foundation that I would expect most people to have if you've been writing CSS for a couple of years, but haven't really ever taken the time to go deeper. Module 1 starts with kind of flow layout. So we look at the box model and how width and height are different in weird ways, and how margin collapse works, and all the other little details. Module 2 is about positioned layout. So we look at relative, absolute, fixed, and sticky, as well as things like overflow and dealing with hidden content. There's 10 modules. I'm not going to go through all of them. But essentially, we kind of break CSS down into these different layout algorithms. Later in the course, we get onto some of the fun stuff. So I have a module on animations. I have a module on what I call little big details. So it's the small things that make a relatively big difference. Some of the cosmetic properties, like how to get the most out of box shadow or border radius or gradients. Things that are not really layout, but still really contribute to a polished feeling. And this is the actual like course index page. There's also a couple bonus features. So I have the video archive, which is a bunch of like essentially answers to questions in video format. So in our Discord community, if I get a question that I can't quite answer in a sentence or two, I'll like record a 5-10 minute video about it. There's the treasure trove, which actually just came out like a week ago, which is kind of my favorite resources and guides to how to use them. So I found like this collection of tools that I've called gradient generators that kind of smooth out what would otherwise be, actually this one I think I linked to. So, instead of like a typical gradient that has this dead zone in the middle, I don't actually think it'll let me, it doesn't let me show you what a regular gradient would look like for context. Here we go. You wind up with this kind of dead zone. Anyway, that's all a tangent. It's a link to that generator, but also a guide for how I use it and how I get the most out of it with like little interactive things that show how different properties yield different results and how to come up with nice looking gradients in the first place, which is something that we talk a little bit about in the course, but is like I've also kind of used the treasure trove as a way to like sneak in stuff that was kind of cut because the scope was getting a little bit too broad.
Yeah, because you can start going like in every direction and be like, and here's why purple's the best color. Until it starts to kind of bloat the course, but it's great as an additional bit of information. I actually used the I think you have like a components one. I used one of the radix, I think it's called. So like I'm already putting the treasure trove to use. Yeah, exactly.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, so I really appreciate you you explaining or you adding that as like a bonus feature that you didn't even promise in the first place. But yeah,
I did actually promise it, which is like on the landing page. There's a little treasure trove thing, and then it says I think it was delivered in October or delivered in fall. So I felt like I really had to.
Got it.
Was like my final deadline for the course, which
Got
I'm
it.
happy with how it turned out and that I got
Okay,
it out
well,
there.
then I should restate and say a thing that I forgot that you had promised, and I purchased not remembering that was coming. Um,
Right.
yeah, that's awesome though.
Okay.
And thank you to Lexonata for that sub. Really appreciate that. That's super super helpful. Awesome. So yeah, so very robust course and then some. So robust and then a little bit extra too. But yeah, tons of content.
Yeah. I appreciate that. Thank you. It was, it took me about a year, a little over a year of, as we said, like full-time work. So I'm happy with how it came out, but it was
Yeah.
definitely, I had hoped to do it in like 3 or 4 months, and that just turned out to be a wildly ambitious timeline.
It wouldn't be this if you did. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
there's just no way. I'm sure you know better than anyone. There's no way you could have done this in 3 months. One thing
Yeah.
I would love for you to clarify, just because not everyone in chat is considering themselves a JavaScript developer. Like I have a lot of 11 people. Um, would they get value from this course? Because
Yeah.
it's primarily focused on, as you say, JavaScript developers, but like it's primarily focused on like styled components and emotion kind of styling, right?
Yeah, what I would say is a lot of the course is really kind of meant for people who work with a JavaScript framework like React or Vue or Angular. And part of the reason for that is that I felt like there just weren't a lot of resources for that. There was a lot on language fundamentals, not so much on like how to incorporate CSS into like a larger component-driven application. We do use React, but I've actually like tried really hard to make sure that you don't need to know React in order
Cool.
to go through the course. I have a couple lessons that kind of introduce you to JSX, and then for all the workshops and stuff, all the like Reacty bits, so state and context and hooks, all of that is provided for you. So really, in some of the more real world projects, your goal is to like apply styles to an existing React application that is missing a bunch of critical styles.
Cool.
That said, we do use style components. I cover how to use them, and I know that that is a little bit of a polarizing thing. I've gotten some feedback from people who, they feel like it's too much of a detour when they're a Vue developer, and a lot of the styled component stuff just isn't as relevant for them. I would also say that like 80% of the course doesn't touch anything with React or JSX or like most of the course is just straight up CSS fundamentals. The thing that makes it a little bit tricky, like if you've never touched any sort of JavaScript framework, is that 20% that does touch on it isn't like it's evenly distributed, right? Most of the workshops and most of the modules. There is module 3, which is really just components. So that one in particular is like you can kind of just skip that one if you don't use JavaScript frameworks.
Right.
But definitely it is limiting. So if you've never touched a JavaScript framework, it's probably not the best resource for you. Although I do think you would learn a lot. It's just you will probably become frustrated when you realize that like a lot of the workshops are just assuming, because I don't assume React knowledge, but I do assume that you have equivalent knowledge in some sort of JavaScript framework, so
Small
that you're
view
familiar with
something.
components and
Cool.
props and like those kinds of ideas.
Cool. And Michael Chan points out, is 11T not a JavaScript framework? I should have been more specific in, if I'm not using styled components or emotion, is this course still going to be valuable for me? Should have been my question. Not so much if I use 11T is the course. So thank you, Michael, for clarifying that. But yeah.
Yeah, I would say that my goal has been that it will be valuable for you even if you've never worked with React. But if you hate React and you don't like the look of it and you don't really want to learn anything about it, you will probably find yourself a little more frustrated than otherwise. So it may not be the perfect resource.
Cool. Yeah, I think you do a great job of, as you said, explaining those fundamentals that I just kind of always like. Yeah, I know it enough to get most things to work, but like I just last night was using some Z-index knowledge that one of your blog posts had given me, because that's a weird thing, and I knew how to like get out of that stacking context or whatever. I don't still fully know it, but I kind of have a better inkling of it, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
those
that's, I
things
mean,
are really
that's
helpful.
honestly, that's the biggest goal of the course, and that applies regardless of what tool you use, which is just understanding the kind of hidden mechanisms like stacking context, like containing blocks. And I do realize that, like, with all of these things, it does require practice. And I don't promise that you will come out of this course with like a deep, intuitive, immediate knowledge of all these things. The goal is really just to kind of explain these things at a high level and get you some practice with them so that you can kind of continue building your own mental model beyond the course. This is actually one of the things I like to talk about is one of the most common questions I get is someone will show me a picture and they'll say like, does your course show me how to do this layout? And whatever it is, right? Maybe it's like a column with like a sidebar that does some weird thing. And my answer is always, it may or it may not. But the goal isn't really to teach you like the 10 most popular layouts. The goal is to give you a deeper understanding of the language so you can build anything. So like, yes, the goal should be that when you finish this course, you can build that layout, whatever it is, as long as it is CSS, right? We don't touch on like SVG or Canvas or WebGL. But if it is in the realm of HTML, CSS, you should be able to, if not immediately know how to do it, at least have the tools to be able to tackle those sorts of challenges.
Awesome. Yeah, I could keep digging in on this over and over, but I don't want to hold us back from like kind of digging deeper into the course and kind of like behind the scenes whenever you're ready. I wasn't sure if you wanted to show us any of the content to kind of touch on that aspect.
That would be a good idea. Let me find an example.
The overlay doesn't give the full picture because I think that, you know, everyone has a table of contents. Not everyone's content is like this.
Yeah, and I appreciate the multimedia that you mentioned earlier. The like fancy pedagogical word that I've been using is multi-modality, which I've heard circulated in certain circles. The idea is that it is, I'd say, the most common or like the most predominant form of content is probably text. Like it looks kind of like a blog post. But as you mentioned, there are these videos kind of scattered throughout. There are these interactive playgrounds. There are exercises, which is something that my blog doesn't have. There are mini games. Yep. So in this one, right, your goal is to figure out how to deconstruct this set of padding into each of the 4 sides. So you would just go through and kind of add the numbers.
But like even that, Josh, like chat, can we just all kind of appreciate like that is nicer than anything I've made this year? Just the way that mini game, like the padding responds, just that little animation. It's just nice. And so like, yeah, there's just a whole lot of polish on every aspect of it. I'm glad you didn't do this in 4 months because it doesn't feel like you shortchanged or pushed to get it out for any kind of like, well, I said I'd ship it by Tuesday, so oh well. It's like every little detail about it. You're making sure that as we're leaving this section, we actually understand it. When most courses are kind of like, well, I said it. If they didn't understand it, that's kind of on them. When you're like, no, I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that it's taught effectively and that they truly understand it, not just read it, but then can actually put it into practice immediately in these conceptual mini games. So it's just super cool.
Yeah, I would say that like a big part of what made this course what it is that I spent a couple of years teaching at a local coding bootcamp. And what you realize when you teach at a local coding bootcamp is that you stand up at the front of the class for 45 minutes, an hour, whatever it is, lecturing, and then you have a workshop afterwards, and you realize very quickly just how little information that you said was actually absorbed, right? No matter how good you are, no matter how like spectacular of an orator you are, it's just a very, like, you don't learn from one person saying something and the other person listening, right? You actually have to like play with it. At the same time, if you only play with things and you never have that lecture component, then it's very easy to get frustrated or discouraged, right? You don't know where to start. And it's tiring, it's taxing, right? It's difficult to do this active sort of learning. So I do find that like there's a balance there to be struck. And that was kind of my goal, is that, it's not a video course where you kind of just sit back and relax and hope that you will retain some small percentage of what is being spoken at you. There are these mini games. There's also, and I started adding more and more of them as we went deeper into the course. So I'm going to jump to module 4, which I think has like way more of them.
That's when the Grand Theft Auto module comes in, right? And we can just play the full mini game. No.
That would be fun, but no. The idea here is that most of these lessons, if I'm not mistaken, right, you have like a video at the top, then some article that kind of elaborates on that, and then exercises. I'm scrolling way too fast. Exercises. So here it's like, let's kind of take what we covered in this lesson above and try to put it into building something. The other thing that I do, which is a little bit polarizing, but overall I think effective, is that it's not a matter of like you will not have been told in the content above explicitly how to do this, right? There's a little bit of a leap where I'll give you like steps A, B, C, and D, but you have to come up with E, right? There's like a little bit that is unspecified. And of course, I have a solution video below that, so that if you find that like you just can't get it, I try to tell people not to spend more than like 5 or 10 minutes on these because they're meant to be pretty quick. And honestly, like if you try it and fail at solving it, you learn way more than like if you just breeze through it without issue. So I try, and actually one of the first things in this course is, where did I put that? Is it right in the introduction? Yeah, I have this whole thing on like growth mindset and how to get the most out of this course.
You understand learning more than the vast majority. So I just background. I was a teacher for 5 years. I was a teacher longer than I've been a web developer.
I didn't know that.
I taught second grade, and your whole thing of like standing up in front of the class and talking doesn't mean they're going to learn. And I'm like, that's very true. Or that they're going to listen, right? Because even adults they get distracted. But anyway, you do a great job of something that we used to call I do, we do, you do. So like I'll show you how I do it. Here I use Flexbox. Now let's use Flexbox together. Now you use Flexbox, and then we'll come back and we'll see how you did, and I'll give you the solution so you can kind of like ingrain that learning. Whether you know it or not, you're very good at doing that. And I do think that this is important because I know a lot of the chat is are content creators of some kind, or they write blog posts, they do videos, they do streams. And I think that sharing this pedagogical, I was a teacher, but I never I never learned that word well enough. Sharing that and like helping people teach reaps rewards like over and over again, right? Because eventually you are going to read someone in chat's blog post, and if they do a great job, you will learn something from them. I think we all get richer when we all get better at teaching, and I mean richer in the mental knowledge sense, not in that too, but yeah.
I appreciate that. Yeah, no, it's I think a lot of it too. Like it's both my experience teaching at Concordia, which is like a local university that ran a bootcamp program, but also I worked at Khan Academy for 2 years, and like so I had this immense privilege of
phenomenal company.
Yeah, it's a wonderful organization, and they have a bunch of like really talented educators that are there just like kind of as like they're not like software developers, they're just there to like help make sure that the pedagogical approach is kind of if I said that correctly, all kind of well aligned. But yeah, that was very much like in the front of my mind as I was building this. And honestly, you can put like this next to Khan Academy, and they share, but in layout, they share a fair amount in common.
Got it. You froze it for a second there, but I think we got it. That just thought like you put up next to Khan Academy, and they kind of share values in how the teaching is delivered and things like that. So yeah, Now that you mentioned Khan Academy again, this makes a lot of sense. This makes a lot of sense. So awesome. Honestly, I could chat with you about teaching all day. Do you want to kind of talk about the tech aspects of the course platform?
Yeah, no, let's get into that. Cool. And I should say that like the fun thing about this is that my course platform is closed source. So I think this will be like the best way to kind of see what's going on with it.
Awesome.
In terms of the tech stack, I use Next.js. And so my initial plan was that I would use Next.js for the front end, and I would get like a node server with MongoDB that would kind of be a standalone API, and my front end would reach to this API. And then I realized, well, Next has API routes, and they have, get server-side props. You can do server-side stuff. So I thought, like, let me try to just use Next. And when I hit the point where it's just cumbersome, I'll switch to having a dedicated backend. And I have not yet hit that point. So everything is just Next, which I think is amazing, because I don't know that was, I know that that is the goal, right? I remember a couple years ago, or probably like 3 or 4 years ago now, when they announced API routes, they were saying that they noticed that everyone would have these standalone APIs, and it seemed like a lot more trouble, so why don't we just integrate that into Next? But I was not prepared for just how well it works. I can show you some of this in the code. Awesome. Let's take a look at, so maybe just the page that I'm on right now, right? This lesson page. For those who aren't familiar, in Next.js, you can have dynamic routes by kind of structuring things in the file name of, in the directory structure. So if I go to pages Then I have this bracket course slug, which is essentially like the dynamic part of this URL for the course. Because while my course platform only has the one course right now, I do expect that it'll have others at some point. So then CSS for JS gets populated there. Module slug is kind of 0, introduction. And then inside there, you have lesson slug. And so all of that kind of gets populated into their respective dynamic components. And all of this gets rendered on the server side in get server side props. You can see I'm plucking out the course slug, the module slug, the lesson slug from the parameters that are called with the server. I also have a request object, which for those who have used Node before should look a little familiar. For authentication, I use cookies. So my first step is to check if the person is logged in and grab that user object. Then I have to actually pluck the lesson content. So for my lessons, I use Mdx. I couldn't imagine doing a course like this without Mdx. And I'm sure that there are like similar tools that do similar things, but I could not imagine just doing this in Markdown. Because, in Markdown, you have a handful of HTML elements. You have lists and tables and code samples. But I can't just drop in like a bespoke component. Like actually, I'll give an example. We've seen a couple already, like the mini games. Yeah. But one that I think really kind of works well, and I pulled this out into a blog post as well. So if you've been on my blog, you may have seen this already. This like demonstration of how margin collapse works, where you can kind of hover over it or focus it if you want to kind of see how these two elements move apart and how their margins do or do not collapse. I don't know how I would do that with Markdown, right? Like I could have a little video, I suppose. Yeah. But it's so much more fun that you can actually like interact with it.
Markdown makes blog posts so much richer. Like you and Amelia Wattenberger, I feel like are two people who just use MDX to the fullest and bring in components to make the blog post not just like more fun, but also to teach the concept better. Because Amelia has like some great like D3 for simulation stuff that as you're scrolling, it moves and changes. It's like, I wouldn't like you could write all the words. I wouldn't have understood it in a quarter of the time that it took for me just to see it happen with that component. So
yeah, I'm a big fan of Amelia's blog. It's amazing. I have to actually like fetch. So like in terms of what that actually looks like in content, here is an MDX file. It looks quite a lot like Markdown. Like in fact, nothing on this screen right now is different from what it would be if it was Markdown. But every now and then you'll see, and maybe this lesson to have an example. Well, here we go. Aside, right? What is that? That's not like a Markdown component. It's my own little thing. Let's actually pull up this lesson so we can see what it actually is. It's the cascade.
Awesome.
So I have this is the aside component. I have them in a couple different flavors, right? I have like a warning one, a success one. And what I realize is that I tend to be a little bit verbose. And I like giving a lot of detail, but not everyone needs that detail. So what I did is this aside component can have this expanded child. And so when I render this expanded element, I get this little show more, and the person can click if they really want to like learn more about this kind of tangent that I want to go on.
Can you just open that up again? Scroll to the bottom. Yeah. See who you mentioned. That's just really funny. I did not. Yeah, just happens to be. But yeah,
small world.
Yeah.
Let's actually see what I linked. Yeah, it's on the CSS Cascade. Yeah, this is an amazing post.
Such a good post.
Totally.
Yeah, and you in tucking away the advanced information or just that extra information are doing more great pedagogical things of like scaffolding the education where like you do a good job of tucking away stuff like, hey, in case you don't know this, here's an aside, but if I already know it, I can skip it and I don't need to like I could keep singing the praises of the actual teaching skills that you have. And I kind of just want to like point them out because it's like, hey, we should all be doing that. All right. So
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
So essentially that's like my workflow, right? Like I'll start with a new MDX file. I'll draft out my lesson. Usually I'll do things like interactive, right? If I'm just like doing my first draft, I don't actually spend the time developing something because maybe I'll realize in 10 minutes that I don't need this, or it should be something totally different than I initially thought. Then when it comes to actually like, let's build something cool, I'll create a component for it. I do use, in Next, there are a bunch of different ways to use MDX. You can use the official Next MDX package. And honestly, that seems like an underrated option. I kind of haven't taken it as seriously as maybe I should because there wasn't that documentation. And most of the time when I saw people using it, it was on like smaller projects. It didn't seem like it had the same kind of like real world production. There wasn't a lot of customization. I could be totally wrong about that. So what I used instead is a package called Next Mdx Remote. And the thing that makes Next Mdx Remote a little bit different is essentially it's just you treat it like data. So normally what you would have is you would have a page, and that page would be like, lesson.mdx, and then in the front matter you would specify which layout it should use, but like your MDX was a page. In Next Mdx Remote, it's just a file, and it can live anywhere, so you can have it in a database if you want, which is why this business over here, I have to like figure out which file exactly I'm looking for, right? So I grab the course slug, the module slug, and the lesson. I then use that to find the particular MDX file, and then I read file promise, which is just, fs.read file, but in promise form. This is another thing that it blows me away with Next, is this is a component, right? This is a React file. This is a JSX file. And yet I'm doing Node stuff in it. And it's smart enough to work out that like, hey, I'm importing this method. I'm importing path, right, which is a Node module.
Right.
But as long as I don't try and use that Node module in my front-end code, and I only use it in my server-side code, it can like exclude it from my bundle and just use it on the server side.
Got it.
And actually, I'm realizing as I'm scrolling here, remind me if I forget that I want to talk about the breakpoints on this page.
Okay, breakpoints, chat. Don't let us forget.
But I do, rather than jumping around, let's keep going through this. What happens when I actually request the file, right? So I hit refresh on this page, and it's loading this page, and this is kind of what happens on the back end. It figures out which lesson I'm interested in viewing. I figure out if I'm logged in. I grab the MDX content. I read that file, right? So I figure out where the file is. I read the file, and then I run it through matter, which is a front matter. What is matter, actually? Where am I getting that from? Yeah. Actually, I do that specifically to get the front matter, which is the like metadata about. So I need like the title.
Does Gatsby use that same? I'm very familiar with MDX through Gatsby. And is this kind of like similarly coming in? I know it's not coming in through a GraphQL type interface, but is it kind of being handled in a similar way?
I mean, it's structured the same way, right? Like I think front matter is just like a markdown thing.
Okay, got it.
The idea is I'm reading this just as a text file, and then I pass it into matter, which is a markdown processor, and it's able to like take this YAML syntax and give it to me as a JavaScript object. Essentially, that's all that's all it's doing. Where was I with this? Yeah, here we are. Yeah, and actually, so all it really does is it separates the front matter, which I think it pulls into a JavaScript object, and then everything else, which it just passes as markdown. I have some, I don't need to go through all of, like, this is just figuring out some meta information about, like, what's the next lesson? What module are we in? I do have this logic for permission. Fun story, actually. Initially, I was doing this statically, right? So rather than, like, when I actually visit the page, I was just pre-compiling all this stuff. The problem with that, of course, is you can't really do authorization. And what I was doing is, on the client side, if you try to visit this page, I was checking to see, are you logged in? And if you're not logged in, I was booting you away. But some enterprising 16-year-old realized that you can just like add that JS object in memory on the browser, and then, hey, you've unlocked all the course free. So now I do all, That person got a free copy of the course for their ingenuity.
Really? That's fantastic.
Yeah. Well, they also let me know, which was nice. I mean, the thing is, I had known it would be a potential issue, but I was waiting to see, like, will people discover, because, it's a little bit faster if you do it statically, and it just seemed a little bit simpler to me. But I knew kind of at some point this is probably not going to fly. And it was just, I wanted to see, and it didn't take long. It was like 2 or 3 days after the early access launch. Someone was like, hey, so I can access everything. So now what I do is I figure out, okay, based on
like, it was the Willy Wonka challenge. Here's your ticket, kid. You win. This is yours now.
It's been nice, actually, that a few people now have just reached out to let me know about like serious issues. But no one had to, and I don't generally offer rewards for that. Just people were nice enough to let me know.
That's cool.
When things were funky. So yeah, I have this bit of logic to make sure if you can actually see it. I also, one of the little touches that I do custom, let me see if I can find a quick example of that. So here I have this like page break thing. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't immediately obvious to me how to do that because, like what I'm actually doing is all of the markdown is just kind of dumped kind of in here, right? Because this is from the front matter. And so if I'm dumping everything in here, how do I have these page breaks?
These new sections.
Yeah, it just kind of makes things a little bit nicer looking, and it allows me to like break things up. Really what I should probably do is just have more shorter lessons, but yeah, it was one of those things that I wanted this. So what I do is I split based on the HR in Markdown, right? So in my Markdown file, if I have like somewhere over here, I do one of these.
Right.
This normally gets compiled in HTML to an HR, but what I'm doing instead is I'm splitting based on that. So in my server-side code, I now have an array of Markdown chunks, and then I serialize them all individually. So I treat them as if they're separate pieces of content. And then I send each of those down to the client, and they each become their own little section of stuff.
That's clever. Cool.
Yeah, it works pretty well. It does. I mean, there's been a couple times now where like I'm not doing like any sort of like AST parsing. So like if this was in a code snippet, for example, it would break everything. So I've had to be a little bit careful, like not to put these 3 characters anywhere.
Yeah.
But I think there's only one time that I had to like slightly change what I was doing to not have that break. I do the same thing for headings. Because, like on the actual lesson page, if you're on a large enough screen, I have this like set of headers that you can quickly go to. And I'm just doing a regex based on 2 or 3 hash symbols, right? So in Markdown, you represent headers with like, this would be an H2, hello, this would be an H3. So I'm just like straight up treating this as a text file, looking for those symbols, and then plucking those into the headings.
Nice.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it in terms of what happens on the back end. All of this happens when you request the page. I figure out all of this different data, including critically raw content, which is the actual like Markdown lesson stuff, right? The thing that you're actually visiting the page to access. And then I have this serial, or no, wait, it's on lesson content. Actually, I'll do it all in the same lesson content. I have this Mdx Remote Helper, which I get from the package I use, next Mdx Remote. And what that does is it takes an example of the raw content. And again, I have to do it multiple times because potentially based on those page breaks, I might have multiple separate like mini lessons. So I map through them, and then I use this Mdx Remote on each of them. And there's kind of, the way that the custom components work is I pass a definition of the defined components here. So that aside, for example, I have this Mdx helpers where I just have a bunch of my custom components that I can drop in. So aside is right over here, and then this is a full list of all the custom elements I've created. The biggest downside about Next Mdx Remote is it doesn't support in-component imports or in-file imports. So like in Gatsby, in most MDX, I could import some custom thing. And the advantage to that, of course, is that now I'm only paying the cost of this component when I'm visiting this lesson. Next Mdx Remote does a thing where all of the components need to be loaded for all the lessons, which
global.
Is clearly like not great in terms of performance, but you can work around that by lazy loading those components. So for example, margin, collapse. Is this the right? No, this isn't the right. Let me see if I can find it. Essentially, I'm using next. I'm surprised I'm having such a hard time. Maybe I named it something funky. No, it should be right here. Index, yes. So what I'm doing in this file, right? This is that we looked at it earlier, all those visualizations that show the 2 boxes separating in 3D space.
Yeah.
Each of those is a component, and each of those is being lazily loaded. So the thing that's included globally is just this tiny little bit of JavaScript kind of scaffolding. And then when I visit that page, right, when this component is rendered, it actually imports the typically much larger and more hefty file for that to be rendered there. So it's not great. It would be obviously much better if I could just import the files in the Markdown files that I need them. Mdx Bundler gets around this, which is Kenzie Dodds' take on Markdown processing.
Okay.
The reason I don't use that, well, one is it didn't exist when I was creating this project. But
you're going to use that as an excuse, Josh? Come on. It's just time.
I actually did spend some time on my blog, not my course platform, but they use very similar stacks, so it wasn't really any different. I decided to try switching to Mdx Bundler, and the problem that I ran into is that it uses ESBuild as its bundler, which means that you have a separate bundle process, right? So I'm using Next, which uses Webpack for the actual content. And then I do a bunch of custom stuff that I would have to make ESBuild aware of. Like, for example, I have this @components, which is an alias that points to so I don't have to have the thing that you always have of having to count these. Yeah. So anywhere I am, I can just add components.
Yeah.
But trying to figure out how to tell ESBuild to do this, that was the slight thing. The bigger thing was I use a Babel plugin for style components, and I couldn't figure out how to get it to work with that. I kind of spent an hour on it and thought, like, this is a viable path, but I have too much custom stuff, and plus it's like a pretty large project at this point. And really, Next Mdx Remote is working just fine for me. So at least for the time being, I am happily sticking to that train.
Awesome.
Yeah, what was the thing I mentioned not to let me forget? It was the breakpoints.
Chat even did a good job. Hold on. See, chat, by the way, is lighting this up. This does scroll. Wow. We won't scroll it now, but someone did save, I wonder about the breakpoints on this page.
Yeah.
So thank you. I think that was Scott Kellum. Thank you, Scott.
Well, I appreciate it because I am very forgetful. So the thing that I wanted to talk about here, and this is one of those things. So CSS is getting this thing called container queries. And I am so very excited. Yes. Actually, this might not be the best example. I am very excited about container queries. But essentially, I have this sidebar over here. Okay. And like as the window gets smaller, it undergoes a number of transformations. Actually, yeah, this is totally a container query thing. Once I hit below a certain point, there's just not enough space for the content to be nice. So when I go below a certain size, it now kind of pops out. And I have this whole thing, which I kind of like. It makes the lesson unreadable, but you still have a bit of context in case you want to have just a little bit of context. And then when I go all the way to mobile sizes, where even that wouldn't really be super tactical or super, I don't know why this doesn't follow me. It should. Or no, I still am doing that thing. I thought I was doing something different, unless I just have to go smaller. No, okay. I confused myself. So the thing that makes this, and I can show you in some of the code how that is happening. If I go down over here, I have like a whole bunch of these media queries, and I have this is sidebar visible bit of state. And this is one of the things that make styled components really nice, which is I have this bit of state, which is whether it's toggled or not. Mm-hmm. But when I'm on larger screens, right, let's say I toggle it and then I go to a larger screen, it needs to not matter, right? It doesn't matter if I've toggled it or not when I'm on a larger screen. I don't want to have that black overlay over everything. Right. So the way that I solve for that is I have this bit of state is sidebar visible. It's just a use toggle, which is my own custom little React hook that it's like use state, but you can only set it to be a Boolean, or you just call it and it flips it.
It's very handy. I've used it on a few things.
Yeah, I love my little like quality of life. Like if I look at my hooks directory, I have like a bunch of these. I mean, some of them are like very specific, but I have like use on resize, use on scroll, use on click outside, use mouse position within element. That's a good one. Use is on screen, use interval, use has mounted. Right? All these little like use draggable, these little utility hooks that just make React development so much nicer. So what I'm doing is I'm figuring out whether or not it is visible. But then rather than using that in an inline style or some way that would always apply, I'm then passing that to some of these style components. And so I can use that bit of state from within a breakpoint, right? So I'm not using is sidebar visible when the breakpoint is large or larger. It's only when it's large and smaller, which this is my own I have this theme that passes the breakpoints, right? I have this opacity being set, but it's only being set on smaller screens. So no matter what the state of this Boolean is, on smaller screens it doesn't matter because it would only be setting the CSS within this breakpoint, which is it's just such a nice pattern once I've discovered it. The reason I say container queries would be nice is notice what happens to the width of this content, right? So here it's nice and wide, and then it gets narrower and narrower and narrower, but then it gets wider again, right? Yeah. So what I would like is for the padding of this to kind of respond to that in turn, but I can't use a VW unit or a breakpoint because it doesn't linearly scale with the viewport size. It does to a point, but then we hit this point where it actually gets bigger as the screen gets smaller. So I am very excited to be able to target based on the size of this container. My goodness.
Some people aren't looking forward to container queries. Some people just, don't think they're going to be good.
Right.
And they happen to live above you.
Right. Yeah, that sounds like it's happening literally in this room. But I guess it's the people upstairs. So that's essentially the structure of this page. What else is there that is worth talking about?
The mini games. it's adding flavor. I thought it's too quiet of a stream. It's adding flavor. The mini games, are those in like their own components, or are those somehow abstracted out into a mini game component that for people just coming in, that is construction work that's happening around Josh.
Can you give me a second? I want to make sure that they're not on the side of my building. something, because it sounds remarkably close.
Sure thing. Sure thing. So chat, I was just kind of wondering, and I can restate this to Josh, about, and I think we covered the stack, more kind of about the, how much he's reusing components in the sense of like, oh, he's back. I'll ask him.
All right, so nothing apparently seems to be, and they do this like, I guess it's like building maintenance, where like once a year, this will kind of cycle through the building. It isn't usually that loud.
They follow your Twitter and see when you're going to be on things, and then they're like, "That's there it is. That's it."
Yeah. So you were asking about mini games and whether like how they were structured, right?
Yeah. So like I'm like I saw in your lesson folder. So like for one lesson, you showed us the index file, and then you showed us all the components that go with that lesson, right? So it was more about like yeah, not the MDX, but the actual like. Am I imagining that?
I don't know that I have exactly what you're describing. Essentially, okay. I have the lesson. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it's fine. I guess I can just ask the question then. In a sense of those mini games at the end, is that like a reusable component where you put things inside the mini game? Like how do the mini games work on a like component architectural level? If that makes sense.
Yeah. That does make sense. So essentially, I do have a game component. Okay. I also I should say, this all happens within JavaScript, right? So the like MDX part of this, I'll show you just that because it's super straightforward. I think I have a game in module 1, the padding one that we looked at, right?
Cool.
So I just have shortyhand component. So if we go look at shortyhand, shortyhand.tsx, this is one of the very few files that I use. For my games, I use TypeScript because there's like so many different permutations. Mind you, I don't use TypeScript, and I'll be embarrassed by my TypeScript code because I don't actually type that much stuff. And whenever TypeScript just gives me, I spend more than 2 minutes, I'll just like slap an any on it and move on with my life. But essentially,
that makes me feel better, Josh. Thank you, because I'm right there with you.
One of my long-term goals.
Sorry, you cut out for a sec. It's one of your long-term goals to learn TypeScript or to get better?
Yeah. To get better at it, yeah, because I when I was at Khan Academy, we used Flow, which is similar, and we use TypeScript at Gatsby. So I've put in the time, but I still don't feel like super comfortable with it. So it is one of my long-term goals.
Cool.
Yeah, so I have this game component, which is reused for all of the different games. It's a little bit messy at this point because for every new game that I add, I realize that things have to be a little bit different, and so it gets a little bit more complicated. So essentially, and we'll see if I can remember exactly how this works. I have this render question function. So every game will be passed an array of questions, and a question does have it has the actual question text. Actually, let's just look at questions TS. So for shortyhand, this is the actual data structure for the game. I have an ID, I have the code that is shown, I have the answer, the correct answer, and I have an explanation for why the answer is what it is. And the actual structure of this object will vary a little bit game. Like, for example, the margin collapse. Margin questions. Collapse questions. Let me just look for questions.
Sounds good.
Will it collapse? That's what it's called. So in will it collapse questions, I do have I still have answer, I still have code, I still have explanation, but then I have metadata because I need question text and I need the actual shape and size of all of the different boxes. And actually, I think I briefly played with it, but not enough for anyone to know what I'm talking about. This Will It Collapse game is a game about margin collapse. So the idea is you have this chunk of CSS, margin top 20, and my goal is to figure out where the box should go. So I have this puzzle piece that I can drag around. And it starts off relatively straightforward, but as you go through, they get a little bit more complicated. I'm just going to kind of skip ahead to one of them.
Memorized? I thought you had it completely memorized there.
The first 3 I've done enough.
Okay. Yeah. It's just muscle memory at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, so, at this point it starts to get, well, this is it. Both the parent and the child have margin top 40. So is this going to have margin top 40 and then this have margin top 40, or are they going to collapse? And it turns out they are going to collapse. So this margin top 40 overlaps this one, and we wind up with only a single 40 pixel descent. And then here's a different question that actually is very similar. I only have margin top 40 on the child. Does the child move down by 40 pixels, or does the whole thing move down by 40 pixels? And counterintuitively, the whole thing moves down by 40 pixels. Yeah, because this margin top 40 collapses with this margin top 0. and it essentially delegates it to the parent. This breaks if the parent has padding or border, because that's like an obstruction in the way of the margin. But whenever you have margin top on an element, it automatically delegate itself up, assuming we're in flow layout. So this doesn't happen in Flexbox or Grid. It also doesn't happen horizontally, or at least it doesn't happen in the inline direction. So in a horizontal language like English, margins only collapse in the block direction, which is up down.
Got it.
Yeah, and this is kind of the point of this game.
Yeah.
Is there's all these like curious little rules that are very counterintuitive. Questions is kind of meant to trip you up in a different subtle way. So this one here we have box margin padding top 20, inner margin bottom 40, subsequent margin top 40. Actually, this one, I don't know exactly what I was thinking with this question, but okay, let's go through it. Padding top 20, so that means this thing should move down by 20 pixels. That's what I was thinking. Now this is interesting, right? Inner margin bottom 40, subsequent, so this sibling element down here, margin top 40. Question is, even though this box has padding, because that padding is only on the top, does it stop these margins from collapsing? And it doesn't. So both this margin bottom and this inner is like in, they're not siblings, right? We have this element is a child of what would be the sibling. They still collapse. Anyway, that's a total tangent.
But that's a really cool game. I don't know. I think that's great. And also still kind of warping my brain a little bit. That's still just like, that shouldn't be. But that's why you made the game. It makes sense. And so this is the structure, like the data structure of those questions.
Yep. So I have the environment, which is the actual like size of this box. And the width doesn't have to change, but just for a little bit of variety, the width of the container isn't the same every single time. The height definitely is different height requirements for the number of stuff inside. Whether the blocks arranged vertically or horizontally. Entities is the actual set of boxes. So here we're on question 9. So if I go down to, here we are, question 9. I have the container pink box, which is the parent, and then it has its own content of this blue navigation box and heading, right? So all of this is just represented in this giant, many hundreds of line long file. And then the answer is kind of snuck in here too. So the answer is an object that has the XY displacement for each one of those elements. So if I have in the answer code dot paragraph 1, well, I better also entity with the name dot paragraph 1. I should come up with a better way to edit the questions because I found myself just getting confused by my own structure, right? Like when you're trying to map this onto this, it's not super easy. But yeah, so this is my like raw data question, right? Every game has its own file like this, but then the game itself, and this is the tricky thing, right? Is that there are certain things that are shared for all the games. They all have a title. They all have a little help icon with detailed instructions. They all have this idea of rounds. Right? They all have questions and this little correct box. And so all of that stuff is shared and reused across all games. But the actual like what happens in here is totally different for every game. And so the way that I tackle that is I have this render question prop, which is a function. And so it's essentially a render prop, which you don't hear that much about anymore, but still turns out to be really useful in situations like this. So if I look at will it collapse.tsx, I have this game component, which has all the metadata, questions, all of that, what to do when I click the next button, right? How do I know if the person got it right or not? Actually isn't a super obvious question because every game has its own structure for question formats, right? In some games, it's multiple choice. In other games, you have to figure out the actual location of different boxes. And so I have a function that we'll call when the person clicks next that'll tell the game if they got it right or not. And then I also have render question, which is where most of the actual like interesting stuff happened. And because this file was getting a little bit complex, I have a separate component called question renderer. So if we go hop into that, we see that it gets a bunch of metadata for what question, the question that they're on, what index it is, what the user has answered if they've already answered this question, or rather, I forget what the difference is between these two things. And you'll see here, I just didn't feel like dealing with adding a proper type for this thing. The actual functions, right? So what do I do when they click submit? If they've answered correctly, what their submitted answer was, and then I use all that stuff, and it looks totally different from one game to another, but I just render all that stuff out. So I have an environment component, I map over the entities. This box component is just what I need for one of these boxes.
We're just waiting for construction sounds, chat.
It is like, it's Murphy's Law, right? Like this hasn't happened in a year, and I don't do many of these calls. Yeah. So yeah, that's essentially how that works, is each of these games has their own question render. Like I probably even name them thing. Or no, I don't. I do for a couple of them, but not for all of them.
Cool. That's cool though. Like just to see what went into what at first glance might feel like just like a small part of the core, just like, oh, it's just he just threw in these little mini games at the bottom, just it's whatever. But like, first off, there's a lot that goes into it, and I've been curious about that for a while, where it's just like, all right, how is he structuring this out? Because it's one thing to make like a JSX component for MDX and to like make it interactive or whatever, but to make a mini game. Also, does it save my scores? Or
yes,
yeah, that was the other part where like it that adds a layer of complexity there. I'm like, okay, it's keeping my scores there. That's gonna make it a bit more. So yeah, there's a lot that goes into it, but I think it's really valuable because, like we said earlier, it's making sure I didn't just read your words and go, that makes sense. I get that. I understand what he means with collapse. But then I get into that game and I go, what? This doesn't make it. What? Like that's the difference, is that I can read some stuff and go, oh, yeah, okay. So if it's in parent, yeah, sure. All right. Sure, Josh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very easy to have a false sense of confidence with your own, and like it's just natural, right? Like whenever I learn something new, you're following along the blog post, the tutorial, the video, and everything makes sense because you're kind of in this nice little like curated, guided path. But then when you actually try to like do something with that knowledge, you realize, oh, actually, like even though it made perfect sense as you were following along, there's other conditions that you hadn't thought of, right? Not all of it gets perfectly retained in your head. So yeah, it definitely is. It's, I think, really helpful to have this stuff. Record progress is where I was looking for, like, how do I have this, I guess it's a hook or a function. Yeah, I have this context that has all the context for the lesson. And whenever you finish the game, I send that off to my backend to like record so that I can tell how you did. And so when you come back, I even have like a little trophy. Well, you did. So
nice.
Here, I didn't do perfect on my on this account at least. So I have a little silver trophy.
Yeah, see, but you don't know me. I can't do better. That should react to who it is. Like, pretty good, and this is the best you'll do, Alex. So just settle. Just settle for this. Just a couple of quick questions that can just be like, like a one-word answer, just so we can kind of like round out the stack. Things like payments, your email login, and your database. What are your choices there?
Yeah, so I use a merchant for all payments called Paddle. The thing that drew me to Paddle was that they abstract away all of the sales tax. So like, if I was to use Stripe or Shopify, they offer some tools to help me calculate the sales tax, but then it's on me to register tax numbers with every US state and countries in Europe, and then to file remittance slips. I didn't want to deal with all that. So Paddle is essentially the merchant. They're called a merchant of record. So how it works is I'm the wholesaler, right? I'm distributing this product to them, and then they're selling it. They're the retailer. So they collect and remit the sales tax, and then every month they just pass along whatever I've made minus their, I think it's 5% cut that they charge as their like reseller fee. It's definitely like, there's like some quirks with their API. It's not like quite as smooth as it would be if I was using Stripe, and I certainly recommend them for people who really want to be super compliant because it is just like so much easier. But it is like, I look at all the cool stuff Stripe is doing, and it's like, I wish I could take advantage of that. Yeah. So that's payments. User accounts, I use passwordless login that I kind of just rolled myself. And I've built a couple of auth systems before, so I felt reasonably comfortable. I wouldn't be horribly insecure, although...
The 16-year-old might have other opinions, but sure.
I made a silly mistake, which I don't mind sharing. Because I support two different login methods, email or GitHub. And it is possible, unbeknownst to me, that it is possible to have a GitHub account that doesn't have an email. And so when you try to log in with GitHub, or maybe I'm misremembering this, but essentially what would happen is I would search for their email, and if you log in with GitHub, your email was null. So it would pull the first user whose email was equal to null, which was the first user in my account. I forget exactly, I'm forgetting the details because this was in March. But essentially, I realized that if for people that had this certain kind of account, you could log in as my test, which is obviously not ideal, which is a good reason not to set up your own auth. But the other thing too is that like I like making content, right? Like I like writing blog posts and building the course material, but I also really like building stuff, and I don't want to have my job be full content creation. I still want to be building stuff. I like programming too much. So that was kind of how I treated it, was let's do a bunch of stuff, like build my own course platform, both because I think I can make it a really good user experience, but because I can bounce between two different things, and that way I'm not going to burn out on the side. So rolling my own auth wasn't even a money-saving decision. It was more like, I think I'd have fun. So let's indulge myself. I do use magic links. So I know that this is like a bit of, people don't really like this login system that much, which is why I also offer GitHub so that there's at least a choice. Essentially how it works is I don't have passwords. And this also gave me the confidence to like, because, you know, like so many people just use the same password for everything. And so the moment I start storing passwords, I become like a much more attractive target, because if someone gets access to my database, they have their emails and whatever password they use, and then they can try that password on the person's email account. Right now, I don't even store any billing information. So the only thing in my database is your name, email, and I collect from GitHub,
but
and then
you got these quiz scores that I'm sure hackers have been trying to breach you for my scores for months. They need to know.
I do have like user data, which is true. Which, obviously, I never want any data to leak out, no matter how personal or impersonal. But I do feel at least a little bit more comfortable that I've done. No one's going to have their address or their credit card or their passwords. Like nothing super secure is ever in my hands, which is nice. Cool. And I can show you, I'm not going to show you that part, but I will show you a similar part. And actually, I meant to kind of go over this because it's just a cool thing about Next.js, which gets back to what I said way at the top about how like they're my backend. Actually, this is the file I want to look at. Where's the file that shows me how I get there? Lesson slug. So in this server-side function that runs, or no, actually, it's in the component. It's on the front end. So when I go through all that server-side stuff, this is actually rendering the lesson. I have this effect hook. And if the user isn't logged in, I return, which should be an impossible condition, because you shouldn't ever get to this point if you're not logged in, because the server should redirect you. But regardless, once you get to this point, I make a fetch to record your lesson visit. And this is used, so like on my homepage, I have like the most recent lesson that you were on, so I can be back to that lesson when you come back the next time. I need to know which lesson was the one you most viewed. So the way that I do that is I make a fetch request to my API, record lesson visit, I make it a put, and I include just whatever the information about the current page is. And so if I go to /API, and I'll do that over here so you can see, if I go to pages, API, courses, record lesson visit, essentially this looks a lot like an Express application. And I've made it look more like an Express application than you get from Next by default with Next Connect, which gives you this kind of .use, .put, right? It gives you middleware. But for those who have worked with Express, this should look awful familiar, where I have my cores middleware to make sure that you can hit this API endpoint from Postman or from any other website can't create their own.
You're cutting out a bit more. I'm trying to think of what it might be. We're starting to lose like every couple words or so. I'm just trying to.
You know what? I think I can do something. Oh no, I can't. I thought for a second I wasn't on wired, but I am. I just have it running through a port thing.
Yeah, I think it might be like a microphone or something. If on your on Discord where it says video connected there, if you uncheck the noise suppression powered by Crisp, do you see what I'm talking about? I can
let me see.
So here I can show you on mine real quick.
Yeah, let's do that.
So if you see this little button here, noise suppression powered by Crisp.
I don't have that button. I have the little disconnect button next to it, but I'm missing that little button.
Interesting. All right, that is a wrinkle I did not see coming. Okay.
So there's a couple things I can do.
You're actually really good right now. Since I've said it, it's been fine. I just wonder
maybe I have to like hold my microphone here,
or maybe just speak a little louder. Maybe I'm not
Apple,
sure.
Banana,
so
carrot.
So far I got apple, banana, and carrot. So I think we can keep rolling. That's really funny that as soon as I bring it up.
I do, and I had meant to set this up, but I ran out of time. I have like a proper microphone. It's just that I bought new speakers and I have a sound card.
No worries.
I have like a whole setup happening here. I can
All
give it a
good.
try though if I do continue to cut out.
I've lost nothing since I brought it up, so let's just yeah, we're good. Sorry to
Cool.
interrupt.
No, yeah, I'm sorry that
All good.
I definitely want you to hear what I'm saying. So
Yeah.
good. Um, yeah, so this looks quite a lot like any kind of Express application. I first check to make sure that you are visiting this page from my course platform. I then have this auth middleware, which essentially just looks at the cookie and connects user if you are connected, and then attaches a request object. Right, so rec.user. That wouldn't normally be a thing, but I add that to the request with this Express middleware. I do realize that if you haven't touched Express, what I'm saying doesn't make a lot of sense. But in the interest of like moving this along, essentially, this is just my way of doing a bunch of work before I get to the actual like what's specifically happening here. And what is specifically happening here is I figure out what you're looking at based on the body, right? The actual data that I sent with this fetch request. I figure out what your most recent lesson object currently is, and if not, I initialize it as an empty object. And then I merge that in. So I have this little low-dash utility merge rather than a shallow merge that you get with the 3 dots. And essentially I just say for this course, for this module, or rather for this course, this is the current module and lesson that you're on. I have this little update user function, right? So it looks exactly the same as it would if I had like like an Express API.
Yeah.
I use MongoDB for my database, which was another thing that I was a little bit like, I don't know if this is going to work because, it's not like this, because I'm deploying this on Vercel, all of this runs in serverless functions, which means that it's like the best practice to use a serverless friendly database. What that means is that like with Mongo, it expects you to connect and then have this long-lived connection. And because of that, they don't really optimize the startup time. So it might take like 250 milliseconds for it just to connect, which is an extra bit of latency to every request because it has to do that every time.
And serverless functions charged by the second, right? Or by the time. Is that correct?
That is true.
Okay.
Although I use Vercel and I'm still kind of remarkably in their $20 a month plan. So
Wow. Okay.
yeah, it's I pay a lot of money on a lot of hosting is not one of them, which is
That's
cool.
awesome.
I think it turned out not to be a problem also because like serverless functions aren't actually as clean and crisp as people like to think. Like essentially what happens is when a function is called, it persists that session a little bit. And if you have another request 10 seconds, it reuses that connection, right? So if I look at this serverless function, if I was to put console.log hi, it's intuitive for me to think that this function is going to be called whenever this function is hit, but that's actually not true. Or maybe it is. I don't actually know. I haven't experimented with it. What I do know, though, is that the initial which happens auth middleware is not actually paid on every request. And so when I have a whole bunch of traffic, it actually is super quick because it persists the session more than that first request.
Got it. That's interesting.
I don't know. It's not safe to assume that. So if you do have this like horrendous startup cost that you just kind of assume will go away, then that's maybe. But yeah, just really in general, working with MongoDB is fine. And I chose MongoDB not because I thought it was the best data, because it was the one I was familiar with.
Makes sense.
But it's been great. Like honestly, I feel like there is the common discourse is that MongoDB is not a serverless friendly database, and maybe it isn't if you have a massively popular thing. But I use it on my blog too, like that heart you were clicking earlier. That persists in MongoDB on a serverless function. My blog gets about 80,000 hits a month.
Okay.
And my course gets less than that, but still a decent number.
The heart gets about 8 million hits each time, right? I'm pretty sure.
I do debounce it, right? So like I wait until, but it's safe to say that I'm triggering like millions of function calls, if not a month and a year. So it's not like I have like a reasonable amount of traffic, but I'm not trying to run a startup that has millions of customers, right? At that point, maybe you do have to be a little bit more optimized in thinking. But for just about any kind of small startup project like my business here, I feel like it's a perfectly viable option.
Awesome. Voice activation in Discord. Nick says voice activation in Discord might be causing. I don't know how to change that from my end though, Nick.
Have I still been cutting out, or have I still been good?
You started to cut out more throughout. Yeah, since we a bit more. Not as bad, but still kind of happening. I don't want to let it like drown us out. But yeah, we're good. Did we want to get to something? We're not like short on time or anything. I'm just wondering if we wanted to Was there anything else we wanted to hit here, or do we want to hit the subway tracks?
Yeah. I'm happy to move on to subway tracks. I do realize that, we don't have that much time, and I want to make sure that we have time for questions. Maybe rather, and I know that we have building something from scratch. Could we maybe do like an expedited version of that where
Sure.
maybe we'll see how far we can get anyway.
Yeah, sounds good.
Also, while we're talking about it, let me try switching to the onboard microphone, which I expect would be worse, but maybe not. Maybe it'll be fine.
Onboard, you mean on the laptop?
Yes.
All right.
Let's try it, right? I feel like if it's horrible, I can switch back. How does this sound? Do I sound all right?
You sounded quieter, but I can help with that. So give me a sec. All right, Josh, can you give me another?
Yes. I don't know any other fruits or vegetables.
Those are all words, and that definitely helps. So far, so good. We'll see. Maybe it was something about the microphone moving. I have my hunches. I don't think any of them are informed or anything like that. I think I just have it might be that Mercury's in retrograde. I'm not sure yet. I have theories, but let's try the onboard mic and we'll see how it goes. But yeah, cool. I would love to check out the subway trucks. And yeah, I mean, I'm sure you're going to, but just might want to explain what you mean by subway tracks.
Yeah, that's my cute little name for this UI on the left, right? So, and I have it in two places, on the left, and then I also have it over here. And this is something I've gotten probably the most number of questions about, which is how do I do the little lines, right? So if I go down to a lesson I haven't completed on this project, I have these little circles, but then I also have these lines connecting them, and those are child lines.
Right? I'm going to pause super quick. It's still happening. I have one last thing, and then we're just going to push on. Okay. Mute yourself in Discord. Unmute yourself in OBS Ninja. Chad, I'm so sorry for my audio stuff. So did that make sense? Like switch where you're muted. It might be that Discord's being a jerk and muting things. You good? I can hear.
Oh, 1 second. Yes. Okay. I should have done everything correctly.
Yes. So far, so good. And I can hear you all right. If this doesn't work, chat, we're just going to push full speed ahead. I just thought that it's a last ditch thing. We're not going to spend any more time on it.
I can also switch to, I think these headphones have a microphone in them.
I think it's more of a Discord thing just because the same thing was happening and be used
right, it's a totally different device.
I think this will be better. So we'll roll with this. Awesome.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so subway tracks, right? It's this UI that connects all these things. And for the folks with really fine attention to detail, you'll notice that the one that goes from a parent to a child lesson is this kind of L shape. The one that goes from a child to a parent is this kind of S shape.
Yeah.
So the way that works is with SVG. So if I go to module lessons, I do have a bunch of data, right? So I have the actual lessons object, which shows just an array of those things. And then I have, my goodness, do I have a lot of code that kind of goes through and figures out how to handle all of that. Oh, essentially, I have two different concepts. I have dots and I have tracks. So I imagine that's probably pretty intuitive, but the dots are the actual things in the center, and the tracks are the lines that connect them. And actually, before I get to the code, let's actually poke at it in the dev tools, because I think it's worth exploring that a little bit. Essentially, I have a list of items, but I have two lists happening kind of simultaneously. So if I delete this OL, what you'll notice is I only have the tracks left over, right? So I have, and if I do the opposite, so let me get rid of the tracks but not the list, I have lost all my lines.
Got it.
I forget exactly why I structured things this way, but I know that it helped a lot. I think I remember part of why. I had this issue where you'll notice now when I hover over one, it gets like a background, right? It kind of gets highlighted.
Right.
I want the track to show up in front of that. And there was some reason that I had to structure it this way for that to be reliably what was happening. Because otherwise it would kind of get muted by this thing happening. So actually the tracks are in front, right? Like I have it absolutely positioned, and then I use pointer events none, so that if I happen to click right on that pixel, the click is still going to pass right through that track and make it down to the list item that you're hovering. In terms of the list items themselves, or the actual tracks, so if we look at this in the code, I have this list item, which is an item for a single one. The way that I structure it is that Actually, is that how I structure it? No, it's not. Okay, I'm glad I didn't start saying something that wasn't true. I iterate over the list items here. So I have at the start of this whole thing, lessons.map, right? So for every lesson, I have a bunch of stuff that happens. I render the list item, and that's the end of that map, right? So I render over all the things, not doing anything with, actually, I call them bridges in the code base. And then separately from that, below that in the component tree, I have this bridges component. And so if we go look at the bridges component, I have a similar lessons.map call somewhere. I should. Where is that? Lessons.map. Because I have to kind of do the same work all over again, where I have to go through each of the items in my list and make sure that it is rendering. I figure out which lesson I'm going from and which lesson I'm going to by figuring out, essentially, I have an index, right, for every lesson. And if there is no to lesson, I know that I am the very last lesson. And the very last lesson doesn't have anything below that. So then I have to do some work figuring out whether I am, oh, right, this is one of those subtle details that no one notices, but I still felt like I had to get right. Let me open this up. The current lesson is a larger circle. And if I zoom, how do I, oh, did I disable that shortcut? No, I didn't. If I go to another one, notice the size of this little pipe gets a little bit shorter because I want to make sure the space from the track to the circle is consistent no matter what size the circle is. I think I would be amazed if anybody had ever noticed that. But I am a bit of a perfectionist when it comes to these things. So I have to figure out. Sorry,
I don't think anyone consciously noticed it, but I think your hunch and overall philosophy is right in that people subconsciously notice the aggregation of those kinds of things across a site, right? Like a few pixels off here and there, and eventually that adds up over an entire website or an entire experience, and all of a sudden it doesn't have that same level of polish, and people can't put their finger on it, but it just doesn't feel as good, right?
Yeah, and I think it might be, you might notice it more if I didn't do that. So I've disabled that code, and now the lines don't move, but you'll notice now like it's way closer to this one than that one.
Yeah.
I also noticed that they're not perfect circles, which appears to be a bug. Like this is slightly rectangular, which I'll have to figure out.
Interesting. It's a squircle.
Okay, onwards. I have this bridge component, and this is essentially a little wrapper component that controls which of the three bridges. Oh, no, actually, that's right here. I have three bridges, right? The simplest bridge is just bridge.js, and this is a straight line, right? Because if I'm just going from a lesson to a lesson, I just need a line. And so I do have to do some work. You'll notice I have a bunch of these constants, right? These big all capital word letters, variables. Essentially what that is I have a bunch of this data that I've just decided is an arbitrary size, right? So every row is going to be a fixed size. The row height actually gets a little bit shorter for sub-lessons, right? So this is 30 pixels, I think, and this is 50.
Oh, yeah.
I also should have done this in rems. I did it in pixels, but it should have been done in rems, because if the person bumps up their font size, I'm not actually going to be expanding this height, which is not a good thing. I only kind of realized that after I had already done it, and I haven't circled back yet. But I have a variable for that. I have a variable for the difference. So the normal row height, the sub-lesson row height, and the difference between those two. How big the dot size is normally, how much bigger, or how big the current dot size is, that larger blue one, and the difference between those two things. Of course, this is derived from just doing the math there, but I gave myself a variable for that just so I didn't have to keep doing that little bit of math over and over again.
Cool.
How much I want these things to be padded by, how much they should be indented, right? Because these sub ones are indented by a little bit. And then with all of those numbers, I have all of this logic that figures out exactly where each of the little pipes should go. And because it's a separate layer, right? So I can't take advantage of the flow structure and say that, and I thought about doing it this way too, but I wound up not doing it that way because it seemed more complicated. I thought about rendering each of these items individually and then kind of appending the bridge in each one. It actually wound up being simpler for me just to say, render all the items irrespective of the bridges, and then do a second pass, kind of filling in those gaps between them. And I can do that because I know exactly how tall every row and sub row is. And I know exactly, like if I'm index 7, I can do the math and say, OK, the previous 5 lessons were full height and then 2 were smaller height, right? So you can kind of figure out the vertical offset by doing those calculations. Yeah, this was, I think it took me 2 or 3 days to build this component, which is kind of a silly amount of time to spend on like adding little connecting lines between the dots.
I I I spend all my time looking through code pens of forms that turn into a roller coaster that go into butts and stuff. Like I'm so okay with wasting a few days on something that seems really small, but turns out to be a great effect that I haven't really seen elsewhere. And thinking about actually like doing it, I don't know how I would do it. And this is a really interesting solution to this. Real quick, Ben Holland just rated us with 11 people. Thank you so much, Ben. Welcome, people from Ben's stream. Would love to know what you were working on. We are looking behind the scenes of CSS for JS developers. We are with Josh Comeau, and we're just he's showed us so much already. We've dug into the actual course, the stack he chose, the lesson structure, how he's using Mdx to build out these multimedia based lessons. We're just digging into this one component that is definitely more than meets the eye. Because it's something where it's like, oh, it's a list, and you have. It's a nested list now, and you get to the alignment and grid areas. It's just children there. But the whole line in, line out thing, and then the size differences. It's a really interesting problem to solve. What made you want to do this over just your typical list? Like was there an inspiration from this, or was it subway cars? Where you're like,
there was
an
inspiration. Yeah, actually. A few years ago, I wonder if I still have it. Yeah, Starcat. I wanted to build a visual Git client, and I never actually built it.
Okay.
Feel free to build this if you would like. This was my initial concept. Oh, I'm doing the wrong zoom. This is the right zoom. I thought it would be cool to visualize the history in a Git project. So this would be your current branch, or this would be the kind of parent branch. And there are visual Git clients, but none of them worked kind of like this. And I like subway maps, right? I think that's like a great way to depict lists just generally, or not so much lists, but sequenced content, right? When you have a list of different things that are all, I guess it's an ordered list is the word that I'm looking for. So I had this kind of thing that I thought would be fun to do with something. And I shared on Twitter when I was designing it. I came up with a bunch of sketches, which I think were on pen and paper, so I don't have them, but of different ways that I could do these kinds. This swoop was version 5 or 6 of how exactly. I first had them be symmetrical, where they were both kind of L's. So this first one would go down and to the right, and this one would go left and then down. But it didn't look quite right, having it swoop out like that, because you want to be going from top down. You want to, as if you were spilling some water at the top of this, it should kind of flow naturally all the way down. And having it veer to the left felt wrong to me. So then I came up with this little squiggly S, which is actually the next part I want to talk about, which is how those work. Because for the straight line ones, I think they're just divs. Let me double check that, actually. I have the code, may as well look at it. Bridge element style.div, right? It has a background color and a width of 2 pixels. So that's this, my goodness.
Oh, also, Josh will be teaching us how to do some drywall later, chat. So if you just dropped in, stick around for that.
They're doing construction in my building. Apparently, no one told me. Yeah.
It's totally fine. You can just roll
the good news is that it doesn't, it goes for a few seconds and it stops. And that's the way it's been, because it's a year ago. And it was similar. You get these bursts of noise. Fortunately, if we're just a little bit patient, we can still kind of work around them.
He's a lazy construction worker. He's taking real long breaks.
Yeah. Okay, so that's for the bridge ones, right? For these straight ones, they're pretty straightforward. I could have used an SVG, but why bother, right? When a div with width 2 pixels will work just as well. But then I couldn't use a div for these ones because they are shaped. And there's 3 separate parts to each one. So let me zoom way back in. First, I need a line that goes straight down like this. Then I need a curve, right? I use an arc for this one that does this little bit of a curve. And then I need a second little line that goes for the 3 or 4 pixels. And that's what it is, right? So if we look at the, oh goodness, so zoomed in. If I go to bridge to child, right? So from a parent to a child, we can see that I have an SVG with a path. I recognize that this path syntax is utterly gibberish to people that haven't gone well deep into how paths work, but I will very quickly attempt to summarize. And essentially, you have a command, which is usually a single letter, and then you have data for that command, right? So the first command is m, which is move, and you pass it an x coordinate and a y coordinate. So I want to move to point 0, and then whatever the top of this stem is. I think the way I did this, let me check if that's actually true. Where was this defined? Oh, OK, yeah. So I thought initially maybe this was all one big SVG, but it's not. I have an SVG that is absolutely positioned, right? So the actual bound, and I can just look at this in the inspector, actually. The bound, actually, I shouldn't have done that. I should make this smaller. And then make sure this is enabled. But I need to get rid of the OL first so that I can actually focus these things. This is turning into more trouble. Yeah, there we go, right? I have these absolutely positioned elements that are all, and you can see kind of here, top 359, left 24. So each of these is just kind of positioned in exactly the spot that it needs to be. And so then inside the code here, I don't have to worry about factoring that in. I can just assume that like 0, 0 is the top left corner of this particular box, right? Or this particular box that includes the thing. So first I move to a point. Then L is a straight line, and I move straight down, right? So I'm still, x is still 0, but then I'm going down by whatever height minus arc radius is, which is another one of those kind of magical numbers that just works. Then A is an arc, and this is, an arc is just part of a circle. So if you have like a big circle and you grab just like a slice of that, you would have the little arc. And you have to pass it a bunch of data, and I don't remember offhand what each of them is, right? You need the radius, apparently lots of zeros for some reason. And then once this arc finishes, which I do kind of the 90 degree, like from, I have a line that goes straight down, then I have a 40 or 90 degree arc, and then I have a little bit of a line, which is the very final command, just to round out that thing. Just to kind of, maybe it'd be fun to show if I remove everything but the arcs, if I remove those little lines.
Got it.
Now we can see that like the arc is just responsible. Let me see if I can get that a little bit more over. It's just this little bit, and then there's just straight lines that add the rest of it. That's for the bridge to child. The bridge from child takes a different strategy. So let me undo that. And let's go check out bridge from child. For bridge from child, I could have done a similar thing, right? I could have said, do like a 90 degree turn, and then a straight line, and then another 90 degree turn. But I tried that, and it looked a little bit too artificial to me. Like I wanted it to have, and if you look really closely at it, there's no straight line in the middle here, right? Like it kind of organically swoops down.
It's a nice
so
it's a Bezier. Is that what that is?
Exactly.
Nice.
Yep. It is a cubic Bezier curve.
Nice.
So essentially, this is the start point, this is the end point, and I have this swoopy little line between them. So if I go back to my code.
Yeah, that's a great effect.
Yep. So I still have a little bit of a line. Apparently, I still needed a little bit of a line. I think it's literally like 2 or 3 pixels. Like this little part right here isn't part of the curve.
Of course you would put in a 2 to 3 pixel line, Josh. Of course. Were you up at night just like tossing like there's 2 pixels that are just off? I don't the Bezier isn't doing it 100%. Gotta add the line.
It is. I mean, the nice thing is that I have been fussing with SVGs now for a number of years, and I don't actually have to, like, it is just obvious to me that I need this line. It doesn't,
it's cool.
Fortunately, which is cool. Like, it's good that I've had enough experience now that I can just intuit what is necessary. Because I don't think I actually thought about it. It was just like, oh, yeah, obviously, if I have this little curve, but I don't want it to curve like, because I don't want it to be so aggressive that immediately upon the subway or the line leaving the circle, it's already curving. I wanted it to kind of, have like a little bit of imagined inertia if this line was actually going vertically down. At least that's like my weird way of thinking about it.
No, and I think you've developed taste after working on so many UI projects. So over time, you just kind of get like a second sense for it.
Yeah, I think that's true. It's one of those things that practice definitely helps.
Yeah.
I've restructured this now just to kind of walk through this one. So I have the same move command, right? I have to move to the start point. By the way, the reason that this is not 0 is that it depends on if the before child is active or not, right? Because I need to know whether it starts literally like right at that point or if it should start a little bit earlier. At least I think that's what it's doing. Now that I look at it, I don't actually see it doing that. Maybe it's that I disabled.
Before the point? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think I disabled something that would have done that. Anyway, that's like a little detail that I am curious now, though. Let me see. If I click on this one. Yeah, there we are. It doesn't actually seem to be moving, which I thought it did. Anyway, I think that's why I had done No, it's not actually. Okay. It depends on. Oh no, that is why. I feel like I'm going back and forth.
This has been a roller coaster of 10 seconds for me, Josh.
Yeah, so I have this type right after current, and essentially this is going to be true if the one that I'm currently dealing with, and this is a bridge from a child. So if this one is after one that is current, right? So in this exact situation where the lesson right before is current, the actual start of the stem will be a different place. It will be stem size instead of 0. And stem size is half of the difference between the larger dot and the smaller dot. So you get the kind of difference, the delta between those two. And then half of that amount is how much it moves down by. It's weird that I don't see it moving, but I trust that maybe it is just such a good illusion that if I zoom way in, let's see. So at this point, let me make it a little bit more centered. At this point, it is after that. No, it isn't moving.
Yeah.
I feel like I changed something because that should be moving. And I know that I did tweak something earlier to stop it from moving. Yeah, that's totally what I did. OK, let me go fix that because I want to make sure that I know what I'm actually talking about. In fact, I think the easiest way to fix that is to stash everything.
Got it. OK. So just something that you tweaked when you were playing here?
Yeah.
Got it.
There we are. OK, now things look.
It moved?
Now my world makes sense. OK, so when I move up between this one, notice that
yes.
little pipe gets a little bit shorter. And similarly, when I go this one, right, when I bounce between these two,
nice.
That pipe gets a little bit shorter.
OK.
Yeah, that is like one of those little details that I am very pleased to have gotten correct, or pleased to have spent the time so that it feels correct to me, at least.
Yeah.
I did want to talk briefly about just like what all this is. Essentially, I do the same kind of thing where I move to a given start point. I do a straight line just for a little bit, just from whatever the start of the stem is to this stem size variable, which is half the dot radius, so a couple pixels. Then I have this C curve, or C command, which stands for curve. And it takes 3 points. It takes the start point, or it takes the first handle point, it takes the second handle point, and it takes the end point. So if you're familiar with Bezier curves, right, and actually I have a way of demonstrating this. Let me search for myself. If I can spell my own name correctly.
It's funny because Thomas just dropped in the chat, and I was about to ask him to post the resource that they had found and were sharing. I don't know if I remember your Bezier curve. Yeah, I think I do.
This was my first blog post on my own platform, which is kind of fun. So with SVGs, something that's kind of fun is that the points meld into each other, right? So there's actually 4 pieces of data that you need for a Bezier curve. You need the start position. You need handle 1, which, I can't do that. Handle 1, you need handle 2, and then you need the end position. But I can omit the start position because I've drawn a line to this point, right? So we draw a straight line, and then wherever we end up is now the start position for our Bezier curve, and then it does control point 1, control point 2 from that, and then wherever we end up. And so for this curve, which I can't really do because I can move these endpoints. So essentially, I'm doing something like this, where control point 1 is like this, control point 2 is like that, and then I have a little bit of a line, a straight line on each end, and that's how I get this shape. I realize that working with these numbers can be a little bit intimidating, but what's nice is I don't actually have to, because I've created all these little constants for myself, like I know how big the stem size is, I know what the width and height of this little rectangle is, I can kind of derive a lot of these numbers just by doing the math with those numbers. There is still like some subjective, how exaggerated do you want this curve to be? Yeah. So like, for example, if instead of let's double this number and just see what happens. Now, and let me zoom this way in. This is less curvy, it looks like, because I have moved that control point further down, whereas if I had set this to, let's multiply it by 0 to make it 0, well, now it's like even more, it actually goes up a little bit. Yeah. So, you can play, and I did play with those things a little bit to try and make it feel right. But yeah, I think that's the extent of how this all works. It was just a lot of the hardest part was actually just figuring out what I wanted these lines to look like, how I wanted them to curve. Because like I say, I tried 3 or 4 different ones and none of them felt right. And then I hit on this one and it was like, yes. The other thing that I've been doing too, and the reason I felt okay spending this time is for the course development period. I've kind of stopped doing this now, but still to an extent. every Friday I would just work on whatever I felt like, whatever like whimsical task that really, if I was being like trying to evaluate if it was worth spending time on that or not, I would probably say no. Waiting for construction noise.
It's
there we are.
fine. Yeah.
I mean, I would talk through it, but A, I don't know if you could hear me, and B, I can't hear myself think.
That
so it would...
the second part's important. So yeah, that's good.
Yeah. What was I saying? Right. Yeah. Fridays. Every Friday I would just pick like kind of a whimsical task to work on, and that would be what I spend my Friday on.
Cool.
Another example of that was, and actually I have to make a little tweak to my code in order for us to see it. For people that I had known previously, or for like people that I wanted to maybe review my course, I created a separate invitation flow. So you can access the course in two ways. You can buy it, or you can get an invitation for it. And the invitation flow is like a different entire flow that I created first back before the course was purchasable, and I had to invite people to help me beta test it. What I'm doing now, though, is I realized that if you are already logged in, I redirect you away, because this is like, doesn't make sense to try and redeem an invitation. In fact, you would also have to have an invitation. So what I want to do is comment this out. And will that work? Let's see if that works. So now if I go to localhost 3000 /invitations /abc123, see if that works for us. Doesn't look like it does.
What are we expecting would happen?
I want a spinning envelope in the middle, which is another example of my like Friday task that isn't really worth doing. Yeah, I think what's probably happening is I guess I could do that actually. Give me one quick moment.
Yeah. Did your Blender work fall into the Friday stuff, or did that become part of the job, or become part of the main?
That was kind of just like a separate thing.
Okay.
Yeah, that was more like my fun evening thing. Although
cool.
Actually there was some amount of that. Like there were times where I would just create something in Blender and then like, well, actually Friday was like do whatever you want day. So there were definitely Fridays that I spent more time in Blender. Yeah, I realized actually this is a good example. The reason that this failed is I commented this code out, which means that this set flash message and this redirect in server-side props method were not being used anywhere. And then what winds up happening is Next doesn't know if you're trying to use this function on the front end or the back end. And so it tries, like it's saying that you can't use the FS module on the front end, right, which makes sense because it's a node module. So what I have to do is comment the imports out as well.
That's funny.
And then we'll see if this actually, if I go to invitations /abc123, I mean, it may, yeah, it still doesn't work. But this is what I was planning on fixing. So if I go to, I have this little admin panel that I built for myself.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so I have, and this is my local host, so these aren't real people. It's all just me with various, like, I guess, like versions on my email address. Yeah, what I want to do is create an invitation. So hello, me@hi.com.
Oh, cool.
And then I can copy the invitation URL. And now this is the invitation flow,
nice,
which is kind of fun. So I have this spinning envelope, and then you click on it, and it opens up.
Really nice. Josh, that's awesome.
And this was another, like, I think I spent 2 or 3 Fridays on this because I just had too much fun with it. So, you know, you can change your name if I got it wrong, and then it goes back into its envelope and shoots away, and now you are on the course platform.
I love that. I love that you like putting that in for, I'm guessing, about 100 people tops is just super cool. That's yeah. But it adds a bit of polish for, like, if I were someone who got that. And, you know, like, say, I'm sure people who, like, work on Chrome or, like, you know, write the MDN docs were like, getting those invitations where it's like, oh, yeah, of course. But then they get that. It's like, okay, you have my attention.
That is kind of how I justified it to myself. Yeah. And this is actually how I justified more broadly spending many, many months building a course platform from scratch, was I knew that, like, I could do things that no one else was doing because most people are using an off-the-shelf course platform like Teachable or whatever else, which there's nothing wrong with that, right? Like, in fact, like, from a business perspective, overall, it may have been smarter for me to save 6 months. But there are things you can definitely do this way that would not have been options otherwise. And I definitely wanted to, like, lean into those things. Yeah. So there were definitely times that I went a little bit over the top with it.
I think it's safe to say, looking back, you would say it probably paid off. I'm, from the outside, it doesn't seem like you have regrets about how you went about this. It seems like it's been a big success already. It's only been out for about a month, right?
Yeah, no, it's been great. Honestly, it did way better than I expected, and I'm thrilled just that it means that I can now dedicate my time to this, right? Like when I started on this journey, the fear was it wouldn't do well enough to like replace a full-time income. And not that that would be the worst thing in the world, right? But it was still like that was the concern is like, can I, as like an unproven online course creator, create something that people will buy in sufficient quantity to justify me spending more time on this? Because I spent about the 7 or 8 months from when I started on it to the early access launch, really just kind of building something with zero expectation or idea how it would go. Yeah.
No, so cool. And as I've said a couple times, it's good. It's quite good, and people are going crazy. You and Bruno Simone, I think, both launched courses within this past year, and those two to me, like he also made his own course platform, and they both just are some of the best courses that I've seen in probably ever. Like I think I have not seen Sarah's course. I didn't get the wait, did Nix say Bruno before I did? I don't know if they said it at the same time. But anyway, your two courses, I recommend them to everyone, and I'm just shocked at how well they stand up or exceed. I'm not going to name any platforms, but like big platforms that a lot of people push content to, and I don't know. It's just it's super cool to see that made bespoke for your own specific needs. And I'm excited to see who you inspire next. Maybe Sarah Sweden's course is one of them. I have not dug into that one, but I should. But yeah.
I'm excited to see what Sarah produces because I'm a big fan of her work. And yeah, I really appreciate all the kind words. It's definitely been, and like the downside is that you wind up having to do a bunch of stuff from scratch. So it's certainly like a lot, like I don't have like an affiliate program that people keep asking me about. It's like, well, I'd have to build that.
Yeah. Oh, I'm not going to get, I was going to use, everyone use code TROAST at Josh's site so that you get 10% off the first CSS property. I don't know. I'm not sure what it is, but yeah, we can work on that. That's stuff that you can wait on for sure. The envelope though, you couldn't have launched without that. So in fairness, priorities. That's good.
Yeah.
Let's check out some of the questions that people have been asking a lot of questions. So I'm excited to dig into these. Let me just bring up that.
Let's do it.
Page. I'm trying to click the world's narrowest like resize line, and it's completely hidden. I have to guess at where it is, and it's like half of a pixel big. So I'm trying to find it specifically. All right, cool. So nope, that's the wrong one. Wonder. There we go. And then I wonder browser interact. There we go. Cool. So I wonder what the magic 8-ball thing. So there's going to be some in here that are just either jokes or they reference something that already happened, like the breakpoint. So that was Alan grabbing onto the breakpoints when we wanted to talk about those. Jasper asks, I wonder any major performance issues you encountered while building the course that forced you to pivot? Good question.
Yeah, that is a great question. Not really. Nothing that was so major that it required a lot of, like the closest thing was I noticed that when you click on a lesson, there was like 6 or 7 re-renders happening because like the user data would come in and I forget exactly what it was, but like this was re-rendering an awful lot. And I solved that with a use memo. So I feel like when you hear about use memo, there's often these like, which by the way, I should explain, it's a way of making sure that the component doesn't re-render unless its props change. Whereas by default, whenever a parent component re-renders, it'll re-render all of its children. If the state changes in some parent, all of its children will be re-rendered regardless of whether or not those children are past that state as a prop. And as a result, I had this lesson page that was re-rendering a bunch of times that it didn't need to be. And it was actually like creating noticeable slowness to it, but that was easily solved with a use memo, which I do think, like, when you use memo as a tool to combat noticeable issues, it's amazing. I feel like often the discourse is around like don't prematurely optimize, which is fair, but it's a great tool for optimization when you actually run into those things. The other thing that came up was the initial version of Next Mdx Remote was doing this thing where, like, when I click on a link, it scrolls you to the top, right? Because it makes sense. You're going to a new lesson, you should be at the top. But there was this asynchronicity where when you click on the lesson, it would scroll you to the top while the old lesson was still showing, and you'd have this moment of confusion where it flickers out into the new content. And I had this like list on my to-do, or item on my to-do list to figure out, but then they released a new version that fixed it. It was a matter of like Next Mdx Remote was doing, they weren't like, they were re-rendering something before the MDX had been parsed rather than waiting to re-render until the MDX was parsed. So they fixed that for me, which was nice, and I didn't have to do anything.
Awesome. Awesome. And Ben Myers of Semantics, thank you for the raid. Welcome. Hope your stream went great. Great to have you over here. And thank you for that follow. Wow. Awesome. I wonder, did you do the course content and the course, but the actual app that hosts the course, aka the course, separately? How did you approach that? Great question.
Yeah, that's a great question. I built them in tandem, and I had started trying to, like, I had kind of done platform first for a while. Like, to a certain extent, you need to just spend some time on the platform because you need a way to render MDX files. But what I quickly realized is I would build a component that I thought would be useful for content. And then when I get to the content, I realize, and I think I alluded to this earlier, like, now what I do is I start with the content and I'll add little to-dos for, like, do something interactive here, add a little video here. And I wait until I have a pretty clear mental model of what this lesson will be before I work on the actual platformy stuff. There's also this kind of weird line between platform and content in this course because, like, working on my game component, is that content or is that platform? It's kind of both. So it really was like I didn't necessarily draw that much of a distinguishing line between them because they influence each other, right? You realize as you're building the content that the platform isn't quite right. And maybe you realize while you're building the platform that there's some cool thing you can do in the content or some limitation that you have to take into account when you're doing the content. So for most of the development, outside the first maybe 2 months, I just spent building kind of a CRUD app from scratch and doing like user authentication and all that stuff that I knew that I needed. Once that was done, it was really a matter of like, let's start building a lesson and then add the features to the platform that are needed for that lesson. And also just bounce between them as much as I can to try and make sure that I was always doing something different.
Awesome. That makes a lot of sense. And Anthony asks if you've read the CSS specs front to back. You've definitely dug into them pretty deep, right? But
yeah, I have not read them front to back. And it was embarrassingly recently that I started looking at the specs. It was maybe like a few months before I started working on the course.
Got it.
For a long time, I figured the specifications are there for browser vendors, right? Like if I'm working on Google Chrome, the engine, or Chromium, I need to figure out what the language designers intended when I implement this CSS property or this feature. And so for a long time, I just figured it was too arcane and too technical for me. But then you actually try reading them, and for sure, they are tricky. Like, I don't want to make it seem like it's like an easy Sunday read, but they're surprisingly accessible, right? And I think I have actually, I'm trying to remember who told me this, that they're actually written for both audiences. They're written for browser vendors, but they're also written for developers. So you should feel totally encouraged to like go and check out the spec, especially when you run into these kind of quirky situations where you just really aren't sure why. I often will start at the MDN documentation, and if I don't get sufficient depth from MDN, I'll go down to the spec. That's like if you're drilling towards the earth, that's the next level down.
That might be what they're doing above you, actually. So you just need to be aware and kind of careful there. So yeah.
Yeah.
It's perfect. I do want to be cognizant of your time. It is 2:00, or are you West Coast? I don't remember.
It is 2:00, yes.
Okay. Are you good to answer a couple more, or do you want to?
Okay, I don't have a hard break or anything.
Okay, cool. Do you want to? Yeah, is it good to? So I wonder if this works. I think we can skip that one. But yeah, so whenever Josh gets all of his inspiration for delightful interactions.
Yeah, I do spend a fair amount of time on Dribbble. For those who aren't familiar, Dribbble is like GitHub for designers. It's a place where they can show their work. And every now and then I'll see like some cool thing there, or just like when I'm a web browser, I'll see things that I think are neat. Often, though, I'll just have ideas for things that come to me when I'm not even sitting at a computer. Like I'll be lying in bed at night, and I'll have some like nifty idea for how something could happen. On my blog, do you mind showing my screen again briefly?
Not at all. Duo desktop. Yes. Cool.
So I have this little kind of animation that happens behind my character.
Cool.
And with this, I was trying, there were two things. A mall that I was walking through had a bunch of like lines painted on the walls that were all facing kind of the same direction. And then it also kind of reminded me of like iron shavings, right? When you have a magnet and you see them all kind of cluster to the magnet. So that was essentially like those two things, and then just a bit of experimentation. So for a lot of things, it's like kind of random. Like it's just some random connection in my brain suggests that I should do something a certain way, and often it starts there and then it kind of evolves into its own thing as I realize that like, oh, this would actually work better doing this other unrelated thing. You kind of ideas form. It's almost like you have to start work to get the ideas rather than waiting for ideas before starting the work.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that tracks with a lot of what I've heard artists say. Like you just need to kind of like put in the work and yeah. I'm not going to try to think of the quote that I've heard recently, but yes, I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, awesome. We can hop back to this. Let's see. I wonder, Josh. Yeah. Wonder what monospace font you're using.
I use Operator Mono.
There you
go.
It's
a wonderful font. It is paid. I think I paid $100 and something for it.
Yeah, I saw that.
I think it's worth it.
I think it's more because I think I paid $100 for Dank Mono because it was the cheaper operator. I think operator's like $300 or something.
That could be. I think I purchased it like 5 or 6 years ago. Maybe it's gotten more expensive, or maybe I'm just totally misremembering. But I mean, I feel
or
like
I'm lying. I mean, whatever. Yeah, check it out for yourselves, chat. Don't take our word for it, right? That's,
yeah. I think it's just worth it because you spend so much time, or at least I spend so much time looking at my code editor that it's a good investment.
Yeah. I wonder if you can post a link to the page for Amelia. I got posted twice now. So yeah, it's the CSS Cascade post and Wattenberger.com. I know that might not be a thing you know how to spell, chat. Amelia Wattenberger, awesome blog. And she was on a couple weeks ago. Fantastic person.
Yeah.
I wonder why using Next.js instead of Gatsby.
Yeah, this is an awkward question given that I
wrote a blog post about it, right?
Did I? I might have.
You did. Or maybe
I wrote
you
a
just
blog.
tweeted about
I think I wrote a blog post about how I built my blog that I think mentioned a little bit about this. I use Next for my course platform because I needed a backend, and Gatsby is great. And this changed somewhat recently. Gatsby does have functions now, but at the time Gatsby was purely static generation, and I didn't want to rely on static generation given that I needed authorization and authentication. And the downside to static generation is that if someone is crafty enough, like that 16-year-old, you can work your way around any sort of client-side authorization that you build in. And it just, it offered features like API routes. And I mean, these are all related to the same thing, but API routes and server-side rendering that just seemed like they would be useful for what I was trying to do. I do think that Gatsby is still a great tool for a lot of things. In fact, I use it for the CSS4js.dev, the landing page for my course.
Oh, cool.
That's in Gatsby because it's like a landing page. Like it's the perfect use case for that.
Awesome.
My blog moved to Next for two reasons. One was that I did actually need functions because I had like the like button and things, the hit counter, things that actually did have a backend component. But also, those are the two projects I work in the most, and I was sick of the context switching of bouncing between Gatsby and Next between these two projects.
Makes sense. Awesome. I wonder, did you use Framer Motion at all for any animations, or React Spring or something else?
Both.
Oh, okay.
I use React. So Framer Motion is wonderful. If I had to recommend a single tool, it would be Framer Motion because it allows you to do, and actually, if you wouldn't mind sharing my screen again, I'll do one more.
Always good to go back to the well. I actually just read, to go back to the treasure trove, you have a thing on Framer Motion there and kind of selling me on it.
So in these, in the course, in the Flexbox section, I have these demo units, and the goal is to play with the Flexbox properties. And you'll notice as I change these properties, there's these animations that show how, like, it's not just repainting as the new thing, right? It actually animates those things that would ordinarily not be animatable, right? You can't animate the change from flex direction row to flex direction column. Framer Motion makes this trivial. Like it's so easy to do. And I've built a library called React Flip Move that tried to solve for this problem. And it's an incredibly complicated and hard problem. What you have to do very, very quickly in summary, you have to let the layout update so you can see where this element is going, calculate where it was, where it's going, get the delta between those two positions, apply an inverse transform so that even though it's in its new layout, you shift it back to where it started, add a transition property, and then remove the transform so that it slides into its new position.
Yeah. So FLIP, right? It's
yes.
the first, yeah.
Yep. And it gets so much more complicated when you think about interrupts and adding items and removing items. It's remarkable what the Framer Motion team has done. It's such a powerful tool that makes stuff like this that I know how hard it is to do this stuff. And I was like sitting just stunned when I realized how easy this made so many things that used to be really hard.
That's awesome. Yeah.
So that's that's the main thing I use Framer Motion for. React Spring is also really useful. It's essentially like a fancy number generator. Like it allows you to generate these really, really nice, fluid, springy motion. Framer Motion does do springs as well. I wonder if I have any examples of things that I used React Spring for here. I may have used it. I think I used it for, wait, no, this is the wrong page. If I go back to where I was, it's subtle, but notice that I have this little, let me make it bigger.
You have an entire blog post on springs, right?
I do, yes.
Yeah.
A friendly introduction to spring physics. Yeah. If you Google that in my name, you will find it. The little bouncy house, I think, uses React Spring. Because in that case, I just needed nice little motion for this little micro interaction.
That's cool. But back to for Framer Motion, we're actually having Matt Perry, the creator of Framer Motion and of Motion 1, the new abstraction over web animation API, on in 2 days. So should be pretty exciting.
Awesome.
Yeah,
I would. I'm going to come check that out, and I recommend everyone else should too.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and just in case chat's curious, we've also had Cassie Evans come on specifically to talk about GSAP's Flip plugin, and that should be in the videos down below. It was maybe a week or two ago. So yeah, Flip animations are really freaking cool. It's like animating the unanimatable, basically, right?
Yeah.
Oh, awesome. Cool. So both. That's yeah. Is there anything?
It's not the smartest from a kilobytes over the wire perspective, but the nice thing about my course platform is I'm actually not so concerned about minimum. I think I probably have gzipped 300 kilobytes of JavaScript for a typical lesson page, which is a lot, but it would be a lot for an e-commerce site.
Yes.
It doesn't really matter for what I'm doing here. I mean, first of all, I'm server-side rendering, so you're getting the page quickly. You just have to wait a little bit for it to be interactive. But also, I'm not. You pay that cost once the first time, and then it's cached, and you're good. And I'm not so worried about someone having a somewhat poor first load experience and then never coming back to my course platform after they've paid for the course.
Yeah, your bounce rates aren't going to be a problem. Yeah.
Right. So I try to optimize for the best experience, not the fastest performance.
That makes sense. And Jasper says, thanks for walking through when you did each one. It makes sense. Awesome. Glad that helped, Jasper. Jasper, thank you for these questions. I genuinely appreciate. It just
A+ questions.
Yeah, seriously. I wonder, did you have any designer friends, colleagues review your course?
No. Maybe I should have. I have, I've written blog posts about collaboration with design, and for that, I made sure to reach out to a bunch of designers to make sure that I wasn't I was accurately portraying their experience since I talk about that.
Got it.
I did. I mean, I got a bunch of people to just check out the course and let me know what they thought. I don't think I reached out to anyone that works as a designer, but I did get design feedback regardless, right? People just have thoughts about, oh, this thing is kind of weird, or there's some weird bug over here.
That line should go down 1 pixel. Yeah. on the subway tracks, that line's got to move. Awesome. I wonder, what's the root folder structure of the project? What separations of concerns are you doing with this many individual components?
Yeah, and I'm still sharing, so I will go over that.
Sorry. I forgot that you couldn't see what I'm looking at. So I guess me reading them out loud hopefully put those words in your head, chat. That one's from Nix XDA. So thank you for that question.
Yeah, folder structure. I don't care that much. So you'll notice SRC components has a lot of stuff in it. Not so many, but if I collapse this, I'm still going, right?
Yeah,
Lots of components. I don't care. I do think that there would be some marginal benefit to structuring this in a more concern-focused way, but that benefit is greatly eclipsed, in my opinion, by the amount of time spent structuring that. Because the problem in my mind, and this is like, again, maybe a polarizing opinion, it's tough to figure out where something sits, right? Like if I have a users folder and I have an admin folder, where do I put stuff related to the admin user? Or if I have, like there's all these, in a perfect world, we'd have these neat buckets and I can have, okay, I have this concern, right? Searching. And I have all my components, all my hooks, all my backend code, everything for searching. But then there's these weird gray areas that kind of sit between two different concerns. And I have worked in projects like that, and it just drove me, like I really didn't enjoy it. So what I do now is I have a components folder and I just dump everything in. I don't ever look at this folder either, right? Like this is maybe the first time in months that I've actually just looked through this list and seen how big it is. If I know the name of the file, I will jump to it using Command T. If I don't know the name of the file, I will find out the name of the file using the DevTools. So I have a style component plugin. If I actually look at a style component, module lessons, right? Li class module lessons will tell me the name of the file this component lives in. So now armed with the word module lessons, I can hop over to it here.
Perfect.
So the actual mess of having so many components, one thing I do want to touch on is you'll notice each of these components has a folder. And I like doing that because I can group things that are very clearly related. Like, for my confetti explosion, which is a fun name for a component, I have my confetti explosion, which is the actual thing. And then I have confetti piece, which is a single piece of confetti. I'm never going to use this component anywhere else. Hey, confetti.
So that's our confetti.
Confetti geyser is another example where I have, and this is fun, it just shoots confetti all the time.
I love it.
I have a use physics. So I do actually do a little bit of concern-based grouping, right? I have this random hook in here, but I only do that when I know that this file will only ever be used by the component that the folder has as its namesake. So confettigeyser.js will be the only file that ever uses usephysicsengine.hook. So I do that, and that's kind of nice because it does allow me to quickly see which of these files are related to this component, right? If this was all just flat and I had use physicsengine.hook, it wouldn't be immediately clear to me which components use that file. So this is the bit of like organization that I do. But even that I think is optional. Like it wouldn't actually hurt me that much to just have one file with like hundreds of JS files in it.
Cool. Thanks for showing us that.
For sure.
Let's see. I wonder what's the root for. Wonder how sales are going. So you say, I'd rather not talk about it if it's something that you if it's more personal.
Yeah, well, I have been public with the presale. So in the presale, I sold about 5,000 copies, which worked out to be about 550,000 USD, which is mind-blowing, right? I haven't been as public about the full course launch. I'll just say that it's done pretty darn well, roughly in the same ballpark.
Cool.
And the reason I'm not being more specific was that I didn't actually want to be that specific in the first time, but I had kind of committed to sharing that data publicly before I realized just how ridiculous it would be. And I didn't want to. And I do think it's helpful for people to have it was helpful to me when I was starting out that Wes Boss, for example, on his course homepages, he puts how many have sold. He doesn't give you the dollar amount, but you can kind of extrapolate, right? You can kind of guess an average sale price. And if you see 17,000 people have bought this course that costs $60 on average, like that's pretty good money.
Yeah.
So I do think it's helpful to share as context for people that are thinking about doing this themselves to kind of get a sense of what could happen. Of course, I don't want to make any promises or, results may vary, but I think it's still helpful to have as a data point.
But everyone in the chat, if you quit your job right now and and go after this, you'll get the same results. Don't worry about it. It'll be just follow everything we outlined today, and it'll be the same. I think you primed the pump, to use an expression from finance or something. I don't know. You put in the work outside of the course too with your Twitter, and like you're good about talking about that there. How like it wasn't solely the course, but it was work over the course of a year or two or however long of writing quality blog posts, helping out on Twitter, all that kind of stuff of building trust with the community, and then saying, hey, I put a lot of work into this thing, and then we all go, it's going to be good. We just kind of know here's the money. So like it's well deserved. You didn't show up out of nowhere and say, hey, I got this thing. You should buy. You should pay me money for this. And we go, who are you? Who are you? Who is this?
It is a really good point and so important. I probably did spend 2 or 3 years just without any real immediate expectation. I did kind of have in the back of my mind it was something I wanted to do, but mostly I just liked helping people. And so I would spend my time on Twitter answering questions and blog posts, right? Like I think I wrote probably 40 or 50 blog posts on Medium. Then I moved to my own platform and I've written, I think 70 or 80 blog posts now. I spend like between 10 and 20 hours on a blog post. So it's like a lot of time.
They take time.
And yeah, I think that's, had I not done all of that, it's true because, if I just created a course and released it, why would anybody trust that it would be good, right? There's so many CSS courses out there. It's not like I'm creating something totally novel. The thing that I'm offering is my particular teaching style. And so if people have gotten a bit of a taste of that from my blog posts, they have more of a sense of what they can get from that. And it's easier to help someone make the decision whether to purchase or not, because they know roughly what they're going to get. And so I do think that, and I've seen that before too, like people just create a course because they want to create a course, but haven't done any sort of community building. And so nobody knows that it exists and it's hard to get word out. And if you can get the word out, it's hard to make it clear the value that the course provides, right? Like no matter how good you are at making landing pages, you kind of need to like give someone a taste or a sense of what your work is like for them to know if it's worth spending money on.
Yeah. And Corey, before it gets too far, thank you for the sub, man. Good to see you. Thank you so much for coming through and all the support always. But yeah, you gave so much to the community for free for so long that when you came out with that pre-sale, I almost felt like I owed you in a sense. It's because like I had read so many of your free content and learned so much from you already. It gets to the point where it's like, yeah, of course, like I'm gonna like it's you gave. So I think that's the other part of it. It's like building trust, but also like I had already taken a lot from your generosity. So yeah, there's that other side of it. Yeah. For the future, looking for another job, build another course, start a startup.
Yeah, building another course is the short answer. The slightly longer answer is that I enjoy this kind of work that I'm doing now, so I do think I'll keep going with it. I had initially planned on doing many courses, and now that I see how much work is required for them, I'm probably not going to do dozens, right? Like I'll probably do like 2 or 3. Cool. I do want to do one on animation and interaction, because while my CSS course does have an animation module, there's just so much stuff that I want to go into that is beyond like framer motion, all the cool things you can do with that, React Spring, Canvas stuff, SVG stuff, WebGL stuff, although I'm still learning that myself, so maybe not that one so much.
So but, I think we can knock this out. Is there a 3D module in the course? I don't think so, right? Like
there isn't, no.
Yeah. But yeah, so the future is going to be a couple more courses and like maintaining this one and probably like cycling between the 3 or 4 or whatever.
And that's one of the realizations too, is that, I do want this to be a course that people can use for years to come. And that means that I have to work on it, right? Especially given the pace that CSS is changing at, right? We're going to get container queries soon, which will invalidate a module I have. So there's definitely going to still be a lot of work, which is good, right? It's great. Nothing would make me happier than having to remove a bunch of the hacky stuff that I teach in my course and replacing it with like, here's the nice way to do this thing.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So yeah, I imagine 2 or 3 courses over the next 2 or 3 years will probably be my midterm plans. Yeah.
Awesome. I wonder what it's like to realize I was using the tool wrong. I think he's probably talking about this thing, or I'm not sure. I either need more context, Alan, or I think he might be talking about the I wonder tool. Wonder how do you do error handling like for non-logged in users?
Yeah, so on the server side, that's one of the nice things about middleware. So I do have that. I think I even briefly showed that check where I have that like .use auth middleware. Inside that middleware, if you're not logged in and you should be logged in, I will just bump you to an error page. I can do a res.redirect as you would do in any Express application. On the client side, I don't have any sort of like formalized way of managing it because the types of errors are pretty diverse. But and really, most of the errors happen on the server side. Like, so for example, if you're not logged in, if you're trying to view a lesson that you don't have access to, either because you didn't purchase this course, but you purchased another course, which isn't a possibility right now, but will be at some point, or you purchase like the basic plan, right? The plan that includes the first 5 modules, and you're trying to access module 8. All of that's dealt with on the server side. And then I just either redirect you to an error page or render the current page without the content and with like an error kind of module instead. Yeah, I don't really have, in terms of error handling, I don't really have much of like a formalized system. I do use Sentry for error tracking.
Cool.
But yeah.
Nice. And that's all from the chat. Last question that I had, but I'm blanking on the name of it. There's a new-ish. It's called Stitches. Have you played with that at all? Do you have a take on that? I've just seen it. I haven't touched it. For chat, I think it's a CSS in JS with like no runtime or I forget how they put it. Stitches React.
Yeah, I'm looking at it now myself. I haven't used it, but you're not the first person to ask about it. So I have gotten this question before. Honestly, I don't know enough, but I'm certainly, it looks good. I would say that, this is kind of a trend, this like zero runtime thing, right? Like vanilla extract is another one.
Right.
I don't know that a runtime is a bad thing.
Okay.
Like you can, like, for example, I think I mentioned this earlier, my media query issue, the breakpoint reminder, right? I had this situation where when the breakpoint changes, or I delegate this data to, would that require a runtime? It would, yeah, because you could maybe do it with CSS variables, but I don't trust the tool to be sophisticated enough to know that, unless it is. If it is, then all of this criticism is invalidated. But there are times with style components where I do want to have this style change dynamically based on some React state. And you can do that with CSS variables, but not really, right? Like I can't have the value in a media query change from a CSS variable. You can only use CSS variables as properties in your declarations. You can't, or as values in your declarations. You can't use them in media queries. So there are definitely places where I take advantage of that runtime. The downside is that it bulks up your JS bundle, right? Zero runtime means zero JS, maybe a little bit, but I think like I even saw here, they make a big point of saying on the Stitches homepage, the React bundle adds 6 kilobytes. Style components probably adds 3 or 4 times that amount. But if you're server-side rendering, I struggle with this because I suspect that I am wrong in an important way that I'm missing, but I don't know what the big rush is when it comes to time to interactive. If you build your page in a way where the links still work, the forms still work, right? Maybe you have some fancy client-side link, but it falls back to an anchor tag until that interactivity is ready. How often do you need to be interacting with like dynamic components within the first 500 milliseconds of a page loading?
Before you can read what you're clicking on.
Yeah, like usually you have to spend some time setting context. And if you have a couple hundred kilobytes of JavaScript, even on a slow connection, it's not going to take more than a few seconds, right? Like a few seconds would be catastrophic. And it would be if you're staring at a white screen, right? If you're doing this all on the client side. When it comes to a server-side rendered or a statically generated site, I don't know that it's the most important metric for most cases. Now, if you're building like, I don't know, like some dashboard that people expect to be toggling, and maybe there is, although like even then, you would think that the power users that need it to be interactive immediately, it's not their first time visit, and time to interactive is So I have yet, and my Lighthouse scores are brought down by this a little bit, but for my own blog or course platform, I don't see the harm in having like I mentioned before, Framer Motion and React Spring, right? Both of those add like a couple, like maybe they're both like 20 to 30 kilobytes each. That's bad, but it's going to delay the time. It's not going to delay the first paint or anything like that. And it's going to delay the interactivity by such a small amount that I'm not really worried about it.
Cool. Well, thank you.
But like I say, I could be totally wrong. Maybe there is like people take it serious. People I really respect take it seriously, which makes me think I'm missing something, but I don't know.
No, I am with you in the sense of like I don't fully like everything you said makes sense to me. So yeah, I'm with you, but also ready to step aside if Adi Osmani or someone comes in and goes, no, really, it's like okay, sure, if you say so.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely, I agree. So yeah. Matt, thank you so much. Was there anything else that you wanted to touch on or bring up or plug anything at all?
No, I mean, I would say that I use the same handle everywhere. So Josh W. Comeau, right? My blog is joshwcomeau.com. My Twitter handle is Josh W. Comeau. You can visit either of those places if you'd like to follow me or learn more about my work.
Please
the course is css4js.dev. It's like a play on CSS in JS. So it has the dashes in the same way that you see it written, css-4-js.dev. Thanks so much for having me. This was a ton of fun, and I'm so happy to have been able to join the front-end horse stream.
Oh man, I'm thrilled to have had you on. It's absolute huge highlight. Chat's a big fan. I'm a big fan. Keep making phenomenal stuff, please, because I will continue to throw money at you whenever you ask for it. I promise. And chat will continue to throw confetti. Yeah, chat, please give Josh a whole lot of confetti and a whole lot of love. Thank you for peeling back the curtain and showing us your course platform, because not a lot of people would have done that, and it is such a remarkable, well engineered thing. And I think I can speak for some people in chat where, like, I would love to someday, feel knowledgeable and comfortable and confident enough to follow that same path, because it seems like a really cool thing to be able to be like, I have a course and here's my custom made platform. It's like super envious of what you've built. But all the success is really well deserved. And yeah, man, happy to have you on any time. If you're doing like a garage sale or trying to sell your car or something, you want to come on and plug that, I'm giving you 2 hours. All right, you do your thing. But seriously, always happy to have you on. Yeah, would love for you to come back sometime, maybe for the next course. But Josh, thank you again, and chat, thank you so much for all the phenomenal questions. Seriously, y'all came out with fantastic questions. Can't thank you enough, chat. Let's go find someone else to raid, and we will see you. Before we go, sorry, Josh, I'm gonna keep you hostage for 2 more minutes, if that's okay.
Sure.
So we just did Josh. That's right now. That's what happened. Tomorrow we have Ofer making such a cool multiplayer game for Component Carousel. This month's theme is beauty products for monsters, which, of like all the other themes, is a ridiculous theme, and it encourages weird creativity and stuff. Ofer is making a multiplayer game with Firebase, where everyone in chat is going to get to control like a character and like try to eat each other. It's like an Agrario, if I'm saying that right, kind of game made with dynamic or procedurally generated monster characters. It's so much, chat. We're going to learn so much tomorrow. I'm super hyped for it. And then, as we were talking about Framer Motion, the creator of Framer Motion and this new animation library, Matt Perry, is coming on Thursday. So this whole week, we've got fantastic guests. If you're not following already, go ahead and follow. And I'll see you tomorrow and Thursday for some great shows. So thank you again, chat. And let's go find someone to raid. Josh, thanks again. See you, everybody. Bye. Take care.